And we are alive. Welcome to the MLB Deeper Dive. It is Friday, August 13th. I am Josh Engelman. I am joined by Adam Scher. And if you were here for the strategy show, this probably looks familiar, only I'm wearing a different shirt. We are here to break down all 14 games for this slate. Once again, we've got about 75 minutes to do so. We should have no problem whipping through this slate. We've already started getting a bunch of lineups, so we're going to have a little bit different of some stuff to talk about. But first and foremost, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, but the like button, that's what I'm looking for. We were a little slack earlier today. Let's bump that bad boy up. Adam, any big changes for you since I saw you last 3 hours ago?
Nothing too crazy. We got Josiah Gray confirmed as the starter for the Nats. We got Kyle Schwarber and Alex Verdugo confirmed to be in the Red Sox lineup tonight, even though we don't know what the rest of that lineup looks like yet. They will be playing, so that's a little bit different. Other than that, no, pretty much same stuff.
Feeling pretty familiar. Well, we do not have a ton of time, so I think it is in our best interest to simply dive in. We could probably spend a little bit more time on some of the things that are good, a little bit less time on some of the things that we know are still bad from both shows. So let's start here. Nats and Braves, 3.9 run implied total for the Nats, 5.1 for the Braves. As you mentioned, confirmed Josiah Gray as the starter. Charlie Morton on the opposite side for the Braves. Most recent ownership projections were from 56 minutes ago, so I do have it. Morton at 20%. How does that make you feel?
I think it's good. I mean, it's a kind of difficult slate. There's basically the pitcher pricing is just soft in general in most spots, especially on DraftKings. So there's going to be a lot of pitchers, or there's enough pitchers that are underpriced where none of them, I don't think, are really going to get crazy amounts of ownership. Like if pitcher pricing were tight and then you got an $8,300 Charlie Morton here, he would be insanely popular. But because there's a lot of pitchers that project really well for their salaries, it's going to keep it in check. But he is one of my favorite pitchers here because he's got a good matchup against Washington. He's just a really good pitcher in general. You do have some weather risks, potential for a delay, I think. But assuming the weather cooperates, it's just a really, really good spot for Morton. And when you think about the pitchers priced around him, you know, that are getting ownership as well, Jack Flaherty getting some ownership at the same price, Blake Snell getting some ownership at $100 more. Blake Snell is a much more volatile pitcher than Charlie Morton is. Of course, Morton's capable of having a bad game, but you know, Snell has major question marks about his ability to throw strikes. Jack Flaherty's making his first start coming off the 60-day injured list, so he's got certainly question marks around him. Charlie Morton to me just kind of seems like, for lack of a better word, because I hate using the word safe when we talk about pitching, but he seems like the safest out of this group as long as the weather cooperates. And you know, he's got this good matchup against Washington. I really like Morton at 8,300.
Hard not to. Just kind of fits in that section. The price tag looks fine. If Jack Flaherty had one start already and was coming back at that price tag, I would like him a lot, or at least a lot more than he is right now. But in that case, I don't think it's there. So yeah, I'm happy to get to Morton. I do want to point out K-Diz in chat. I just banked the Brady out of 250 NFT and immediately dumped it for 8,500. Genius or idiot? I would say genius.
Yeah, at least you're not whoever sold it for $1,250 right before you sold it for 8,500.
Yeah, I mean, could it go higher than that? Maybe, but I would be more than happy to lock in 8,500 at that point in time.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, I don't know, I feel like in the little bit of time that I've put into this type of stuff, like normally I don't regret selling something too early. I regret not selling it and then not making anywhere close to as much as I could have.
Yeah, like I don't think that it's ever going to be 85,000, so there's not like that kind of worry. Right. And if it's 11 instead of 85 or something like that, you can only be so mad. Congrats, though, by the way. That's kind of sick. All right, let's start a little bit on the bats here. What do you want to do with the Atlanta Braves on the opposite side of Josiah Gray?
I think it's a really big boomer bust spot for them because it looks like the weather should be decent for hitting. There's rain in the area, which typically means, humidity, and it looks like it's close to 90 degrees. It's always humid in Washington anyway. But Josiah Gray, he's posted good strikeout numbers in his limited time in the majors so far. He is one of the top pitching prospects in baseball, but there are some red flags too, where you could see how the Braves potentially have some success. Gray so far has walked 13% of hitters. That's obviously not very good. Not only does it mean that he's walking guys, but he's also working behind the counts a lot, which sets up favorably for batters. He's allowed 1.93 home runs per 9. Particularly, he's struggled with left-handed power, which the Braves don't have much of, Freddie Freeman accepted. But it's still a situation where Gray could just be working behind the counts against a bunch of really good hitters, get in trouble that way. And then you have a pretty bad Washington bullpen behind them where the Braves can just tee off. So I think it's a very, very high upside spot for them. Right now, we have them as the 4th highest top stack percentage, ownership about where it should be. So I like them, not jumping off the page as far as, a team that I would expect to be my highest owned stack in tournaments, but I think it is a good spot for Atlanta in terms of ceiling.
Yeah, it depends on the guy for me. Like, I think Soler looks pretty good, looking under-owned pretty aggressively for me. I think Freeman is quote-unquote over-owned, but he's also Freddie Freeman, a key piece of this lineup. I see them as like slightly better than neutral while still ranking as a pretty decent stack. It scares me a little bit, but I'm trying to take the run total as like the real way that I should be looking at this. I've got it at 5.1 for the Braves, one of the few teams that are north of 5. So I'm using that as my sort of barometer of maybe where Gray is right now overall. I think I'm willing to take those shots given that Albies and Freeman are the only guys in double digits.
Yeah, and I think I think the run total just reflects the fact that it's a really high upside spot. There's a variety of ways for them to get there. They can get to Josiah Gray. Josiah Gray can give you a solid 5 innings, and then they just get to the bullpen. For example, just think about all the times recently where it seemed like teams are going to fail against the Orioles, and then the starter gets taken out, and suddenly there's 10 runs. So, they can get there that way. There's just a lot of ways for them to have success here, even if you do acknowledge that Josiah Gray is a talented pitcher.
See where
and also, I mentioned that he's really had issues so far with lefties with a 324 expected ISO. He's still allowed a 197 expected ISO to righties. He's struck out 37%, but the point being, it's not like he's giving up zero power to them either. He's just been much more susceptible to lefties.
I actually have the Braves second overall. My crunch just finished now, but 21st in terms of leverage. So a little bit over-owned. A team that I would get to, but will ultimately get pushed down a little bit to like, the 3rd or 4th ranked team that I have that also isn't over-owned. Anything for the Nats for you against Morton? I can't imagine the answer is yes.
No. I guess obligatory Juan Soto is really good at hitting baseballs mentioned, but other than that, no. I mean, this is just one of the worst lineups in baseball. Charlie Morton is just a good pitcher across the board, just not a spot that I'm really looking to.
Well, then let's keep it moving to Phillies and Reds. 4.7 run implied total for the Phils, 3.8 for the Reds. Zach Wheeler, Tyler Mahle. We've got Wheeler at 21% ownership. I think that looks pretty good even at 10-3. We've got Tyler Mahle at 11% ownership right now, and that feels a little bit high, at least for me right now. Talk to me about Wheeler to start, and then give me your thoughts on Mahle.
Yeah, I mean, I like Wheeler here. I think the difficult thing is that he's relatively close to being correctly priced, whereas there's a lot of really underpriced pitchers on the slate. He's extremely good. He's been one of the best pitchers in baseball this year. He has the 3rd highest strikeout percentage behind Ray and Gray. 2.77 xFIP is the best on the slate. 0.58 home runs per 9, only a 5.5% walk percentage. He's averaging nearly 7 innings per start as well, which gives you a little bit higher floor than a lot of pitchers give you because he's just going to, pile up those points. So I really like all of that. It is a tough matchup against Cincinnati. Castellanos is in the lineup. He was questionable. So, it's tough to just, navigate your way through India, Winker, Castellanos, Votto, Moustakas, all back to back and, not give up at least a little bit. So it is, I think, a dangerous matchup. There are pitchers that have much better matchups. So I think Wheeler's a good play. I think getting around 21% ownership makes sense. I don't really think I think he's owned about where he should be.
What about Mahle? 11% owned on DK right now, just 3% on FanDuel. How do you feel about that? 7,100 low price for Mahle, but at the same time, Philly's offense looks pretty good here. It's certainly a hitter's park. How does this look for you?
I like Molly in tournaments because I mentioned it in the deep dive. He's just a really, really difficult pitcher to price, I think, because if you price him solely off of his strikeout stuff, he ends up being really expensive and just priced around pitchers who are better than him. And it makes it really hard to roster him. If you price him more off of his actual talent level, where he's a good but not great pitcher, then typically he's going to get a lot of ownership because that strikeout percentage is so high for the salary. On this slate, though, it's a little bit different because the matchup against the Phillies is tough. And there's also other pitchers priced around him that have good strikeout stuff and are in much better matchups. So you're getting a very clearly underpriced Tyler Mahle, but also not getting a ton of ownership going there. I only look back at his last 10 starts, but he's been above 8,200 or more in all 10 of those starts. He's been above 9K in 8 of those 10. And then now you're getting him at 7,100 and he's not getting tons and tons of ownership. So that just makes him really appealing to me in tournaments. He has struck out 28.5% of hitters. That's 5th highest on the slate. 3.79 xFIP, 8.5% walk percentage is a little elevated, but nothing crazy. He has had home run issues, but that's at all the risks I think are basically baked into the price here. So I do like Mahle in tournaments as long as the ownership stays where it's at. I'll like him even more if actually looks like we're about to get the Phillies lineup. Just got it as we were talking about it. JT Realmuto is in, so that's a downgrade for Tyler Mahle. But overall, I think the point remains that as long as he's not getting much ownership, I think all the risks here are baked into this really, really inexpensive price tag.
How are you feeling about taking hitting in this game, whether that's the Phillies side going up against Mahle and that ownership, or the opposite side, Reds, which it's a pretty nice lineup, all things considered. However, you do get Zach Wheeler on the opposite side.
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot in terms of hitting here. Massive field tournaments, I think you can make the case that this game is being played in Citizens Bank Park. It's a good park to hit in. Tyler Mahle does give up some home runs, but neither team looks that good to me. Like the Reds aren't getting any ownership. They have a 2% chance of being the top stack. I just don't really want to pick on Zach Wheeler on a 14-game slate. On the other side, I think Philadelphia's matchup is a little bit better, but they're also getting more ownership. So a little bit tougher to get there.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling the same way. I have the Phillies somewhere around 8th, and that's about as interesting as it's going to get to me. If I land on any individual Phillies, I'm not going to be super mad about it because obviously there is plenty of power potential in this spot, but not going to push forward too far. Let's move it on to Pirates and Brewers, unless you have anything else for that Phillies game.
Nope.
Okay. Pirates and Brewers. 3.9 run implied total for the Pirates, 5.5 for the Brew Crew. Mitch Keller and Brett Anderson, neither guy pulling any ownership. Do you want to roster either guy?
No, I don't really see a reason to on this slate because there are just so many underpriced pitchers that have good strikeout stuff. I don't think it's really necessary to go to a guy like Anderson that strikes out about 15% of hitters. Mitch Keller's strikeout stuff hasn't been as good this season as it has in previous years. He used to be someone that just had a really crazy range of outcomes where his stuff's really good. He'd strike guys out, but he also couldn't throw strikes and would get lit up from time to time. Now he kind of just doesn't throw strikes and gets lit up, but doesn't strike guys out. So I don't really see a reason to go to either guy. Plus, you do have weather concerns here, I think more so than in any other game. So it's just adding even more risk to the pitching.
Yeah, it's probably likely that we see a delay here. Getting postponed would be not ideal as far as I'm concerned. Do you see this as an offensive spot? How do you want to manage getting to Milwaukee? I know earlier today they were a priority stack of ours.
Yeah, I do like Milwaukee here, assuming the weather cooperates. Mitch Keller, like I said, just hasn't really been good. He's always been a pitcher that you have a very high ceiling going up against because he walks a lot of guys, puts guys on base, works behind in counts. And then now he's just not striking guys out either. He's allowed 1.2 home runs per 9 for the season, 1.26 rather, 5.2 xFIP, 12% walk percentage. There's just a pretty good chance that Keller puts a lot of guys on base, doesn't get deep into this game, and then Milwaukee just gets to light up the Pittsburgh bullpen behind them. You're getting a little bit better lineup today from the Brewers than you got yesterday. Obviously, El Garcia is still out. Rowdy Tellez is also still out, but you do have Omar Narvaez back. Granted, Manny Pena homered twice yesterday, but typically you prefer Narvaez being in there. So it's a good spot. They're not getting a ton of ownership right now. There are weather concerns, but at the moment, the second highest top stack percentage on DraftKings and only pulling about 4% ownership. So that makes them look pretty appealing here.
Pirates bats. Is the opposite side appealing at all? 3.9 run implied total.
Yeah, more so individually, I think, than as a full stack. Brian Hayes looks like one of the better third base options, I think. Not a particularly good position tonight. He's cheap. Brian Reynolds is underpriced for his talent level. Jacob Stallings is fine at catcher, but it's just a pretty bad offense in a park that's not great for hitting against a pitcher in Anderson who does get a ton of ground balls.
4:00, by the way, just in case you want to.
I see it.
Are in the top 100 there.
Don't have a number yet, but
yeah, likewise. If I have a top 100, I'm just going to let you know now. You're going to be taking over the hosting of this show for at least 5 minutes until I check out and make sure that happens. Just not letting that one slip through the cracks. That's for sure. Do you have anything else you want to add here then for Pirates and Brewers?
No.
Okay.
Keep an eye on the weather again.
Yeah, obviously, stay tuned to the rest of this show. Although I don't know how much we'll know about the weather for the next. 27,470. Don't think I'm in the top 100 there.
32,433.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that. I don't think 27,000 people are going to drop out of that one before we get to 100. People are probably listening to this like, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't blame them at all. But keep your eyes peeled for MLB Live Before Lock. If you are a premium sub, make sure you're hopping into our Slack channel at the very least from 6 to 7 to get any updated news or start following the Awesemo MLB account. Tigers in Cleveland, 4.6 run implied total for Detroit, 4.8 for Cleveland. Tyler Alexander and Zach Plesac. Another battle of two guys pulling zero ownership. Will you be owning either pitcher?
No, just another spot where I don't really see a reason to. These are both offenses that we've picked on at times recently. Zach Plesac could certainly give you a serviceable game, but there's just no world where Zach Plesac should ever be more expensive than everyone out of Blake Snell, Tyler Mahle, Shane McClanahan, Charlie Morton, just going down the list. I mean, it just shouldn't happen. Plesac has struck out 15.5% of hitters this year, 4.76 xFIP, 1.7 home runs per 9. I don't really see any reason to get there. And then Tyler Alexander is even worse. 16.8% strikeout percentage, 5.69 xFIP, 1.5 home runs per 9. No reason to get to either of these guys.
Brandon Towers in chat got to 777, which is obviously doesn't matter. Everybody's the same.
I'd rather have 32,000.
So would I. I don't want to be close. If it was like 181 or something like that, and I still didn't get one, I would really be unhappy.
Yeah, I was kind of pissed off earlier in the first one. I was like 1,400 or something. I was like, I couldn't have gotten this one like in so many situations that would be good. And then here it's not even close.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about bats here, Cleveland or Detroit. Do you have a preference to the side? Obviously, I think Cleveland probably looks a little bit better in theory, but prices are kind of different.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland, I think, is the preferred side, but they are also projected to get twice the ownership because they are just really, really underpriced. I think this is a team that you look to in cash games, and then in tournaments, you mix them in your lower owned stacks more so than going to them as a full stack. Like value-wise, Miles Straw looks great at 2,600 leading off. Ahmed Rosario looks like one of the better value shortstops at 4,200. Ramirez, I think, is probably the best third base play on the slate. If not, he's one of them. He's priced up, but he's also Jose Ramirez in a really good spot. Franmil Reyes has massive power. And then you get back to guys that are $2,300 or less basically on DraftKings. So just way, way too cheap for a team with about a 5 implied run total. But there's still 27 other teams on the slate. And, there's, according to the top stack tool, about a 95% chance Cleveland is not the top scoring team. So, I'll mix those guys in. I love Reyes. I love Ramirez individually, but probably not a team that I'm full stacking a ton.
Is there any value on the opposite side?
Robbie Grossman at 3,200 stands out. Plesac has had home run issues this year, and Grossman actually does have some power. I think that's something that sort of goes overlooked because early in his career, he didn't really hit for power, and then he's on the Tigers, which is an offense that we don't really respect. But Plesac has allowed a 198 expected ISO to lefties this year. Grossman only 3,200. I think that looks like a really good spot.
Grossman standing out for me as well as the sort of best option you can find on the Tigers side. I have Cleveland 5th overall, but the second worst leverage stack. So buyer beware, I guess, a little bit. Detroit, though, on the opposite side, 12th overall, third best leverage stack. So I do think that there's like a little bit to be had at the top, but I just, their odds of being successful are so much lower, at least for me, that, they're kind of neutral in the top stack tool, but there's very little difference between, say, 1.8 and anything higher than that. And 3.1, that's all the same thing as far as I'm concerned.
I do just individually. Grossman's only picking up 5% ownership too.
Yeah, it looks good at the top. I don't mind Scope either at 4,100, looking a little underowned. And as I mentioned, I believe yesterday or maybe all week, I always have a soft spot for Miguel Cabrera in my heart. I shouldn't, but I do. Anything else here?
Nope.
All right, schedule for the rest of the day. Coming up immediately after this show at 5 p.m. Eastern, we will have MLB Live Before Lock. I know it's going to be an hour earlier than Lock, but there's a reason for that. Greg and Terry will take you up to 6, at which point they will turn it over to NFL Live Before Lock because we've got preseason football tonight. Eitan Makajeski breaking that one down and going all the way up until 7. But we do have free MLB content for you today. MLB Top Stacks, plus MMA Pro Plays if you're prepping for Saturday's UFC card, both of which free today. Let's keep it moving. We will go to your Baltimore Orioles. They are on the road, taking on the Red Sox. Red Sox with the unquestioned biggest implied total on the slate. I have them at 6.4, Orioles at 4.2, Spencer Watkins, Nick Pivetta. Let's just start with Pivetta. Is he a guy you want to get to at just 3% ownership?
Large field tournaments, if you have more popular hitters, I think it's fine. On a lot of slates, I would actually really, really like the play. But here it's just that the pitching ownership is so spread out because there's so many underpriced pitchers that I'm not overly concerned about making a ton of pivots on pitching. I do think it's a high upside spot for Pivetta. There are strikeouts in the Orioles lineup. They are missing Ryan Mountcastle. They may be missing Ramon Urias as well, who, even though he doesn't hold any name value, is basically a league average hitter. Pivetta has good strikeout stuff, as do pretty much most every pitcher on this slate, 26% strikeout percentage. But just because of the quality of the arms in this price range, it's still tough to prioritize him.
Yeah, I'm with you there. He showed up in 7% of Sims, 3% ownership. As far as I'm concerned, those numbers might as well be the same. Yet, how much Spencer Watkins are you going to get to today?
All of it, obviously.
Yeah, just lock button play against the team with the largest implied total on the slate. Anyway, let's talk about real things. How do you want to handle this Boston Red Sox team? I don't see a scenario where anyone can say that they are not the statistical top stack today. To me, unquestioned at the top. What do you want to do, though, given the fact that they are also being owned as if they are that top stack?
Yeah, just ridiculously good spot for Boston. As far as I know, we still don't have the actual lineup. We just know that Schwarber is in and Verdugo is in, which is actually, so, I mean, it's good, but if Hunter Renfroe is not in this lineup, I'm going to be really disappointed because he was one of my favorite home run plays today. That being said, just absolutely phenomenal spot for Boston. Spencer Watkins, there's nothing about him that makes it seem like he's going to be a good major league pitcher. So far, he's actually held his own against left-handed hitters. I assume that changes as the sample gets bigger. He's gotten absolutely lit up by right-handed hitters, which is an issue when you have problems with right-handed power and you are pitching in front of the Green Monster against this Red Sox lineup. So he's only struck out about 12% of righties, 287 expected ISO. Lefties, he's been better with about a 20% strikeout percentage, 143 expected ISO. But again, there's just nothing that makes me think that actually holds up. I'm certainly not shying away from guys like Verdugo and Devers and Schwarber here. What hitters I really like will depend on the lineup. Obviously, if Renfroe's out, I don't like him. But also like Jarren Duran, assumed earlier in the day he'd be hitting second at 3,200. That looks like a phenomenal value. If he's hitting 7th or 8th, the ownership's going to come down, but he also won't project as well. He's really struggled so far in the majors, but Spencer Watkins isn't a major league pitcher, so that's a little bit less concerning. Just top to bottom, though, really, really good spot for Boston. I agree. There's no real case to be made that they don't have the best chance of being the highest scoring team.
These spots get so tricky. That run total is massive for today. You would think they were playing in a park that wasn't. Imagine if this game was in like Coors or some other bandbox. Like, this isn't like, as much as we want to say that the Monster changes things, like righty park factor of 100, it is neutral. It just changes home runs, but it doesn't necessarily like just shoot them to the moon.
Yeah, it blocks some of them also.
Yeah, absolutely. Height, very important. Is there any interest to you in going to your Baltimore Orioles?
Not a ton. I think individually there's some spots. Anthony Santander is still only 2,300. Austin Hayes at 2,400. Just pretty absurd prices for those guys. Santander seems to be healthy and hitting the ball hard again. We saw good numbers from him in the past. He struggled this year, but seems to be turning things around. Austin Hayes is one of the better prospects on the Orioles. Mullins, of course, is pretty much always a good play because of his combination of power and speed. But in terms of full stacks, there's just a lot of spots I'd rather get to. Also, with regard to the Red Sox, they are projected to be a little bit less over owned now than they were this morning. Their top stack percentage has increased. I don't know if that was a result of confirmation that Schwarber was going to play and Verdugo was going to play or what, but their top stack percentage has increased. And actually the ownership has come down a little bit because, or I'm assuming at least because, like, if Jarren Duran's not batting second, he's not pulling as much ownership. And then it's going to be harder to get to guys, like Schwarber, who's 4,900 than it would be if it, like a 4K Renfroe, for example. So I do like the Red Sox. I love the Red Sox this morning too, in terms of like their chances of success. But as far as getting to them in tournaments, I think they actually look a little bit more palatable now than they did this morning.
Sure. At some point in time, and there's still, you don't want to just immediately grab teams that are over-owned, but when you separate from the pack so much, it does become a little bit problematic to just try to treat them like you shouldn't go there too.
Right. Like you have to look at both metrics because, like, for example, Boston has about a 13% chance of being the top stack on DraftKings, about 17.5% ownership. So you can say, yeah, they're over-owned. And then you can look to a team like, let's say, the Athletics, who have a 5% chance of being the top stack and are getting 1% ownership. The Athletics are very, very under-owned, but actually that's a bad example. So a team like the Padres, right? These are all terrible examples, whatever. What I'm trying to get to is there's going to be none of the math, like on the ones that I keep looking at, none of the math is working out the way that I want it to. But the point here being, if the Red Sox have like a 13% chance of being a top stack, but they're going a little bit over-owned, but then you have a team that has like a 5% chance of being a top stack, or a 6% chance of being a top stack, you can still get situations where, like, even though the Red Sox are going over-owned, they're getting like, let's say 1.5 times the ownership of another team that is technically under-owned, but they have, twice the chance of being the top stack, basically, is what I'm trying to say. There's not any perfect example to point to on this slate, but you do have to consider both parts of that equation.
Ever the wordsmith. We move on. Mets and Dodgers, 3.6 run implied total for the Mets, 4.4 for the Dodgers. Tyler McGill, Julio Urias. Urias at 9% ownership on DraftKings, no ownership going to McGill. What are you doing with Urias at a crisp 9,900?
I don't mind the spot, but I think it's going to be really difficult to roster him at that price because not only is he only $400 less expensive than Zach Wheeler and $700 more expensive than Robbie Ray on DraftKings, but you still just have that really strong tier of strikeout pitchers in the mid-range where the opportunity cost of paying up a pitcher tonight is just really high. It's an okay matchup against the Mets, but it's also not like it's one that I'm like super excited to get to. He's not facing the Marlins. He's not facing the Nationals, or he's facing a team that actually has major league hitters top to bottom in their lineup. So I think Urias is a good pitcher. Just kind of lose him a bit on this slate, I think.
Okay. From a hitting perspective, the Dodgers grading out and pulling ownership that honestly is a little surprising to me. It's low. I guess not surprising in that McGill isn't bad. Are you going to McGill at 8,600? I guess that's probably the better question.
No, he's dropped off a bit, which isn't surprising based on what we thought he was going to be coming into the season. He overperformed at the beginning of the year, but on top of that, just a tough matchup against the Dodgers. I don't really see a reason to, again, sort of overpay for McGill. Like, he's not as good as Charlie Morton or Jack Flaherty or Blake Snell, probably, at least in terms of upside. And then he's also facing the Dodgers. So I don't really, if Tyler McGill happens to put up a score that is just, head and shoulders better than every other pitcher on the slate, so be it. I guess I won't win tonight.
Dodgers bats?
Yeah, some interest there. Again, McGill has been dropping off a bit. The Dodgers are projected to be owned about where they should, but they do just have massive upside. Mentioned this morning, Cody Bellinger seems like he's coming back to life, so that makes the lineup even a little bit deeper. Corey Seager's back and reasonably priced. You have Will Smith back in the lineup after getting a day off yesterday. Trey Turner and Muncy, of course, are always really high upside plays. So I like the Dodgers, but they're not jumping out as one of my top one or two stacks.
Mets against Urias.
No thanks.
Yeah, I don't have really anything else to add there. It's not the spot. So we can keep it moving. We are cooking through this slate right now, which I actually might have to pull the reins back a little bit, slow this bad boy down. Marlins and Cubs. And I think we're going to have a lot to dig into here once again. 3.8 run implied total for the Marlins, 3.6 for the Cubs. We did just recently get a Cubs lineup as well. Jesus Luzardo and Adbert Alzolay. Both guys in the 20s in ownership, right around 20% on FanDuel as well. Whichever guy you want to start with, go for it.
Yeah, both of these guys are going to get ownership, and I think they both should. Adbert Alzolay, 7,600 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel, in a good spot, facing the Marlins in Miami, favorable spot to pitch. Really, really bad Miami lineup. We don't have the actual lineup yet, but there's only two left-handed hitters plus the pitcher in Miami's projected lineup. And that's notable when you talk about Alzolay because he has posted some massive splits this year in terms of both strikeout numbers and production. Righties have struck out 28.5% of the time against Alzolay. They only have a 262 expected WOBA and a 133 expected ISO. On the other hand, lefties have only struck out 20% of the time with a 400 expected WOBA and a 292 expected ISO. So this is someone that if he's going to go up against right-handed hitters, the ceiling looks massive. If he's facing left-handed hitters with power, it's a really dangerous spot. There's virtually no left-handed power on Miami's roster, and their projected lineup, again, has 6 righties plus a pitcher. I think it looks like a very, very good spot for Adbert Alzolay. On the other side, Jesus Luzardo is a really big question mark. He is considered one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He had success with Oakland in the majors last year in 12 total appearances. This year, he's been bad at AAA, was working out of the pen for the A's for a bit, but now he's back to starting with Miami. And in his 3 starts with Miami, he hasn't been great so far either, but one of those starts was against the Yankees. One of those starts was in Coors Field. So, kind of can give him a pass on those. He's cheap enough where I think there is massive upside just because we do know how talented this guy is, even though he has had struggles this year. He's facing a Cubs team that isn't very good. They traded most of their good hitters, and then Wilson Contreras is also on the injured list. So it's another one of these lineups that's basically just full of like AAA and 4A hitters, basically. So it's a really high upside spot. My biggest concern with Luzardo is with all the good pitching on this slate and all the different options we can look to, on the one hand, I understand why he's pulling like 24% ownership because he does project very well for his salary. He does have a very high ceiling here. So I get that, but it's also a situation where you have to think about the range of outcomes. And he's still just a huge question mark where he can certainly just be bad against anybody. That's kind of been what's happened for a lot of the season. So I do like Luzardo. I mentioned on the show this morning that when I just run crunches, I'm getting to tons of him. I think that I get to him a good amount in tournaments, particularly where I have lower owned stacks, but definitely a spot where you do want to keep range of outcomes in mind and not just look at median projections for someone like Luzardo or for anybody, but especially for someone like Luzardo.
So if you have a preference, who is it? We've got Alzolay, $7,600, $900 more expensive. Do you see these guys as like relative equals today?
Yeah, when you factor in the price difference, especially, I do feel a little bit better about Alzolay because you can at least look to numbers and say, like with Luzardo, there's nothing you can really look at and say, oh yeah, he's good at this. Like you're just banking on the fact that he has a ton of talent and that he figures out how to put it together, preferably tonight. With Alzolay, you can look and say, yeah, this dude has just dominated right-handed hitters all season long, and now he's facing a bunch of bad ones in Miami. Like you can actually point to that and feel relatively good about him.
Is there any justification for offense here? 2 teams, sub 4 implied totals, no ownership to speak of, but at the very least, you do get on the opposite side of some ownership.
I think if I went there, I'd go to the Cubs just because, again, I think there is a little bit more uncertainty with what Luzardo is at this point than there is with Alzolay. So I think I'd lean toward the Cubs, but I don't really anticipate getting to much of either.
Seems like a tough sell to grab like the lowest implied total game. It's got a total as if they were playing 7 innings. It's kind of atrocious. Oh, I refreshed. Couldn't remember why. I just pasted in some additional data and I couldn't figure out why it was wrong, but I hadn't refreshed FC in a while and it finally added the ownership column. I wish that I should just disable that. That's neither here nor there. Yeah, I have the Cubs 20th overall, Marlins 22nd. So not necessarily 2 teams that I'm trying to get to. I'm sure that I can find some leverage elsewhere. Anything else here for Marlins and Cubs?
Nope.
Well, that leads us to promo codes. And boy, oh boy, are you guys in luck because these 2 are new. But we'll start here first. 370 people in here, only 70 likes. You slackers are behind. Let's run that number up north of 100. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, notification bell, all that good stuff. But if you are interested in playing NFL DFS this year, we have a promo code. It is Blitz, BLITZ. That gets you 25% off an NFL annual pass. You get it for 365 days. That's big time. 25% off is going to be a decent chunk of change for savings. You get projections, you get ownership, top stacks, premium Slack, and much, much more. Cranking out tons of football content as we speak. but saving 25% on that annual sub, these sorts of deals don't come around all that often. You don't want to miss out on it. But if you're really interested in real football, soccer, including the Premier League, starting up technically today, but first main slate tomorrow. Use the promo code FREESOCCER, FREESOCCER, one big word, and you get your first week of Awesemo Plus Soccer for nothing, nada, zilch. Even if you just want to try it out, if you've never done it before, we have projections for you for the Premier League, and you could use the promo code FREESOCCER to get yourself there. You guys should do that. Premier League's awesome. Go Liverpool. You can't see it in the background, and I don't need Jordan to give me the widescreen, but Liverpool up above my shoulder. Adam doesn't care. It's a shame. Rangers, 3.8 run implied total. A's, 4.7. Dane Dunning, Cole Irvin, neither guy getting any ownership. Should they?
I don't really see why. Irvin clearly has the better matchup here, but he's expensive. And it's just another case where if this slate were smaller or if pricing were sharper or pitchers were worse, you could certainly say, okay, I can probably get like 16, 17 points from Cole Irvin here. I just don't really think that gets it done. Any pitcher against Texas has a path to success. Marco Gonzalez just dropped like 35 points on them yesterday. You don't really get much worse in terms of actual numbers than Marco Gonzalez. So any pitcher can do it, but there's just so many other options to get to that Irvin isn't really one that I'm targeting. On the other side, Dane Dunning, I've gone to him a lot this year on shorter slates, but typically doesn't go deep in the games. You're going to get like 70 to 80 pitches normally, and then just has an absolutely brutal matchup here against the A's. So staying away there too.
So I don't think that they're highly ranked for me, but let me just double check where they are in our top stack tool. Yeah, this is pretty comparable, but I do see Oakland as quite a bit under-owned. Is this a shot you want to take in GPPs?
Yeah, I started to use them in my terrible example of the Red Sox, comparing them to the Red Sox. But yes, I do think that they are, especially in larger field GPPs, like they have about a 5% chance of being a top stack. So they're not a particularly high likelihood, but outside of the Red Sox, nobody on the slate is really that high. Milwaukee's second at like 8%. So there's just a bunch of teams in there that have a similar chance of success, and Oakland's just not getting ownership. You have a very expensive Matt Olson, very expensive Starling Marte, but outside of that, they're not even really that expensive. There's a lot of home run upside here, basically top to bottom in this lineup. They're getting out of Oakland, which is nice. So I do like the A's in tournaments.
Yeah, you and me both. Number 3 for my leverage score. This is the team that I will try to at least. They don't grade out all that well in the aggregate, but at the same time, this is the type of team that I want to try to have some shares of. There's so much power here. They're not all that difficult to get to, and the ability to get what is essentially an unowned stack. We've got Matt Olson at 4.5%. We've got Mark Hanna at just 1.2. The rest of this team is, for all intents and purposes, unowned. That is always going to be at least a little bit interesting to me.
Both of the Tom Brady's low asking price is $4,000 right now. So selling for 8,500 looks very good.
Yeah. Speaking of, we are 8 minutes away from entering Emerald. So just don't forget, but I'll remind you in 7 minutes. This is the way to do shows, man. You just line up in NFT auctions and talk about baseball for a little bit in between. Looks like I know exactly what I'm going to be doing for the next 3 hours. So that's fine by me. Anything? Any interest in Rangers bats against Irvin?
No, just so many offenses on this slate. I don't think Irvin's a bad pitcher. He's not a great strikeout pitcher, but just terrible Texas offense combined with a guy that I don't really care to take hitters against on a slate this big anyway.
Does my audio suck?
Sounds fine to me.
Okay. Sorry. Somebody said it. Sound is messing up, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's a personal thing. I mean, yeah, I understand my voice sucks, but I just need to know if like the actual audio quality is a problem. We'll go on to Twins and Rays. 4.1 run implied total for the Twins, 5.4 for the Rays. Michael Pineda, Shane McClanahan. McClanahan is getting some ownership, 13%, in fact, on DraftKings. Michael Pineda, on the other hand, is not. What are your thoughts on McClanahan for tonight?
So he wasn't earlier today, and I didn't think it made sense that he wasn't. So on the one hand, I'm disappointed that he's getting 13% now because I was really looking forward to using him in tournaments, but I still think that's deserved. And I still think he's a good play. He's only 7,800. He's been stretched out more. He's gone at least 6 innings and 3 straight starts now. He's throwing, 80 85 to 90 pitches pretty much every start. And he's got some of the best strikeout stuff on the slate. He has a 28.1% strikeout rate, 3.29 xFIP. He's been really, really good. The only real concern with him earlier in the year was, how deep he'd go into games, but that's been less of an issue lately. It's an okay Minnesota lineup, at least to the extent where, if McClanahan doesn't have his best stuff, they could take advantage. Whereas there's a lot of teams in baseball right now that as long as, you have like your 75th percentile stuff, they're not going to hit you. So it's a little bit riskier matchup, but I just think he should be more. He's another pitcher that should probably be a little bit more expensive than he is. I think now he's probably being owned about where he should be. So he's less exciting than he was this morning and when I wrote the deep dive article, but I still do like Shane McClanahan here. I think he's a little bit underpriced.
Any Pineda for you at 5,900?
No, I just don't think it's necessary here. I've said before that I think essentially most major league pitchers that are fully stretched out and in that 5 to 6K range are playable in tournaments, but this is a slate that I just don't really think it's necessary because for one, you have a lot of cheap hitters, so you don't really need to pay down a ton if you don't want to. And for two, you have plenty of cheap pitching to pay down for. Mike Minor, we haven't talked about, but he's $500 more expensive. Lazardo is only $800 more expensive. You have Malley at $7,100. And even though that's a price gap, it's still, you're talking, one hitter typically in your lineup to save $1,000 is pretty easy to do. So I don't really see a need to get to Pineda. And then on top of that, it's just a brutal matchup against Tampa Bay.
Well, let's speak about that brutal matchup against Tampa Bay. They are my number 4 overall stack, but also showing up as the most overowned team for me. And it's not just me. They are the biggest negative leverage stack in our top stacks tool, which is free. Again, by the way, you guys should go check that out. So how do you want to manage this ownership for Tampa? The run environment looks good. Park is neutral. Matchup against Pineda looks pretty good. But what do you want to do with this ownership? It was different earlier today where we had Lau and I don't remember who pulling most of it. Now it's a little bit higher across the board.
Yes, and also, so this is a team that's kind of affected by the gap in the Red Sox getting a little bit closer too. This morning, the Red Sox were more overowned than Tampa, and you had a lot of guys on Tampa that weren't getting much ownership, and then a lot of it was going to Brandon Lau, and I think it might have been Nelson Cruz. But now, looking at their ownership individually, you have basically 12+% ownership going to a Rosarena, Zunino, Cruz, and then Lau's at 21.5%. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get low-owned Tampa stacks. Even guys like Franco, Margot, Wendell, Kiermaier, they're all like 8%. So when you start adding those guys together, that's a decent amount of ownership going to those 5 guys in your lineup. I do like the spot against Pineda. He's given up power to both sides of the plate this year. I think Brandon Lau is the best second base play on the slate. If he's not, the best, like you can make a case for like Kike or something, but I think it's Lau. He's just been phenomenal and he's in a good spot against Pineda. Nelson Cruz is underpriced at 4,600, but I think that's why you're getting so much ownership here is you have a 5.5 implied run total. You have a good spot. You have tons of power, and the most expensive hitter in the lineup is $4,600. So it's really easy to get to them. I like Tampa a lot, but the way things look right now, I'd be more inclined to go to a little bit overowned Boston team than the overowned Tampa team, just because I think Boston is still in the better spot.
Okay, we're going to do an example right now since we got about a half hour and I don't think we're going to have any trouble getting through these next 5 games. Let's say you're in chat and you're like, I understand that they're overowned. I would like to go to a 5-man Rays stack. And you're going to go to Brandon Lau and you're going to go to Nelson Cruz, Arozarena, Franco, call it Zunino as well. But the 5 guys that I'm going to say don't matter. What would your plan be to finish off the rest of that hitting and associate with pitching? How much does ownership play a role in those extra 3 spots? How much does it play a role in your pitching decisions?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was answering something in chat.
You're good. That's fine. Let's say you're in chat and you actually like the Rays and you want to go to them even though they are overowned. You're going to a 5-man stack. What does the rest of your lineup look like holistically in terms of pitching or those next 3 spots? What do you do to combat that ownership?
Yeah, that's where you're going to typically either look to a really low on secondary stack, maybe a team that is lower probability than you would normally like, but also just not getting ownership so that, you're at least somewhat unique amongst Tampa stacks. That's where pivoting off of higher owned pitchers comes in. Like normally my approach normally is that I'm more willing to just play popular pitching and then go to lower owned stacks because the popular pitching only takes up 1 or 2 spots in my lineup, whereas the stack takes up 50% of it. But if I'm going to that popular stack, that's where you start looking to the guys like Nick Pivetta, for example. We talked about in that Boston game, not really necessary on the slate. There's plenty of guys that look better than him, but he is still a good strikeout pitcher. He does still have a high ceiling, and he's projected for 3% ownership. So if I'm playing a more popular stack like Tampa Bay, you have to think about it in terms of if Tampa Bay is the highest scoring stack on the slate, because that's what you're hoping happens if you're playing a Tampa lineup, are you competing? Are you still competing with a lot of teams? And in this case, the answer is yes, because a lot of people are playing Tampa. So then you still have to say, okay, then I need to go a little bit more off the board to combat that and put myself in a position where you really just don't want to, especially in large field tournaments, you just don't want to be in situations where you're basically flipping a coin against like 300 or 400 different lineups, because that's just so hard. It's hard enough to win tournaments. Put yourself in a position at least that when things go right for you, you have a very good chance of being one of the top teams. So it's, kind of the more popular the stack you're going to, the more willing you should be to go off the board with pitching and with, other stacks. If you're playing popular pitching, you should be more willing to go off the board with your hitting, so that, your total lineup ownership isn't that high.
Okay. So yeah, like for example, for everybody, instead of going to say Jesus Luzardo at 25% ownership, you go to Tyler Mahle at 8%. Or right. You go from, this might not be your personal best example, but you go from a 29% owned Robbie Ray to a 4% owned Anthony DeSclafani. Moves like that, where you're in the same sort of tier of price tag, cutting ownership. We've got Robbie Ray 7 times the ownership of Anthony DeSclafani now. I'm not trying to jam DeSclafani. That's just the example that's right next to Robbie Ray's name. Moves like that will differentiate your lineup greatly if you're still trying to go to that chalky stack.
I think the way to think about it is kind of like, okay, if Tampa Bay, so like I'm stacking Tampa Bay. If Tampa Bay is the highest scoring team, what needs to happen for me to have a very legitimate shot to just kind of be by myself at the top? So you can say, oh, well, I just need Nick Pivetta to beat Charlie Morton. That's, it's not going to happen a ton, but it's definitely a reasonable request. Something like that. I need Nick Pivetta and Anthony DeSclafani in your example to pitch well. Okay, that's fine. That's a lot better than saying, well, I need to just win. Like I need this 20% owned hitter that I'm playing to beat that 20% owned hitter. Because then this 20% owned hitter, you're pulling up all those teams with it. It's better to just like, you want to be able to specifically point to one or two guys where it's just like, okay, if they do well and Tampa does well, there's a very good chance I'm just at the top.
And then if I'm looking for just individual bats, this should be relatively easy for you to do. Like, I'm just going to start naming guys that are pulling no ownership. Chris Bryant, Wilmer Flores, Herrera. These guys at 1% and 2% that are just like I have, at 4 to 5%. Find those guys that are highly likely to be successful that are also not getting any sort of love. I mentioned Soler earlier today. I think that he's a bit underowned. Guys like that, where you can just simply differentiate pretty easily on those 3 final spots. I know people are always wondering, like, we talk about the Rays as if like they are like they're untouchable. There are ways to still roster guys that are getting owned. You just have to be very cognizant about your next 2 pitcher spots and your final 3 hitter spots. Yeah.
Like, for example, I know they're different positions, but they're the same price on DraftKings. If you stack Tampa Bay, you have 5 guys from Tampa that are pretty popular, and then you're paying up for a one-off. You should prefer someone like Matt Olson to someone like Jose Ramirez, like 20% ownership to probably like 2 or 3%, stuff like that, where the range of outcomes is identical. Jose Ramirez projects a little bit better because the matchup's great, but stuff like that where, you can just get a fraction of the ownership and still have massive upside.
Yeah, Olsen at 5, Ramirez at 15 right now. Just like take that natural savings. The gap between those guys is not nearly as big as it seems on the high end. There's not a park that can contain Matt Olson.
Right.
Circling it back now to the rest of this game, since we've already touched on the Rays. Any interest in the Twins?
No, I think McClanahan is really good. I think FP's bullpen's good. You have some cheap pricing here on guys like Donaldson at 3,800. Garver's fine at 4K, but overall, McClanahan I just think is a good pitcher, and this isn't really a spot on this particular slate that I'm looking to get to.
Okie dokie. 1, 2, 3. We got one more to go before the next break. So let's talk a little bit about the Royals and Cardinals. 3.9 run implied total for the Royals, 4.6 for the Cards. Mike Minor and Jack Flaherty. How do you want to manage Jack Flaherty? 10% ownership now. That is down a little bit from where it was earlier today. Does that entice you anymore?
Yeah, I do like the dropping ownership there. I think he's someone that lost a little bit of ownership with McClanahan coming up. Flaherty's a pretty big question mark here because he hasn't pitched. He was on the 60-day injured list. He went, I believe it was 4 innings in his most recent AAA start. Yeah, 4 innings, but he threw 75 pitches there. So if you assume he's going to be able to throw something like 90 pitches, that's plenty of pitches for Flaherty. He's a good pitcher in general. He's another guy that comes in with 26% strikeout percentage. There's no shortage of those guys on this slate. The matchup against Kansas City is okay. They have some potent hitters in that lineup. They're not a pushover team, but they're not a great offense either. When he was getting 13, 14, 15% ownership, whatever it was this morning, I was a little hesitant because there are so many good pitchers around him and he's got question marks, but now, he's going to come down to 8, 9, 10%, somewhere in there. I'm a little bit more interested in getting there. I still prefer Charlie Morton. I think prefer Blake Snell. But that's close, especially when you factor in the ownership. Point being, I don't think I'm jamming Jack Flaherty in, taking a huge stand where I play a bunch of him and I avoid guys like Morton and Snell and these other guys, but I'm not, I'm not getting away from Flaherty because of ownership either.
Okay. Just circling back to on the A's, Moreland back in the lineup again, 2,200. So something to keep in mind. I think he double donged yesterday.
He did.
What about Mike Minor? 6% owned, 6,400. Cardinals lineup, that is meh. Not a lot of strikeouts in there, though. What do you want to do with Minor?
So Minor's another guy that it's like an example that we could have used in the Tampa Bay conversation. You're going to get a lot of people paying for $6,700 Luzardo in that price range. I think Luzardo projects better. I think he's got a little bit higher ceiling, but he's probably also, if you could bet this, you wouldn't lay 4 or 5 to 1 odds on Luzardo to beat Mike Minor. So it's still a spot where if you need to get low on guys, you can go, let's say in your lineup, you need a cheap SP2, but you also need to save ownership. Mike Minor comes into play. He's basically just the definition of an average pitcher. He struck out 23% of hitters this year, 4.29 xFIP. The concern here is that we don't have a Cardinals lineup yet, but we know that it's going to be basically entirely right-handed. They also get a DH, which is a benefit. Minor's only struck out about 22.5% of righties this year compared to 27% of lefties. He's given up some power to righties with a 208 expected ISO. It's a dangerous spot for him. He's a average pitcher. I don't love Mike Minor, but he is underpriced, just like a lot of pitchers on the slate. So if you need a low-owned guy, that's fine. In lineups where I don't need a low-owned pitcher, I just probably will play guys that have higher ceilings.
Yeah, I've got Flaherty at 10% now, Mike Minor at 8%. Two guys that I'd be happy to see show up in some lineups, but they're not going to be any sort of volume guys. Speaking of guys that aren't going to be volume, any of the hitters on this game, whether that's the Royals side or the Cardinals side, not really enamored with anyone. Nobody as bigger than a 5%er for me. Are you seeing something different? Do you have interest in the Cardinals or the Royals?
So we did just get the Cardinals lineup. I think they're a team that is kind of appealing for one-offs because they're mostly inexpensive. Tyler O'Neill is in the lineup at 3,400. He's missed 2 of the last 3 games, but he's back, at least for now, unless they scratch him. But 3,400 for him. He has a lot of power. He can take advantage of Minor. Goldschmidt and Arenado, we know, are good hitters. DeYoung and Molina offer some upside, but Tyler O'Neill individually, I think, is the guy I like the most from the Cardinals. And then I don't like the matchup for Kansas City, but Whit Merrifield should really just never be $3,600.
That I agree with. Anything else for Royals and Cards?
Nope.
And
Merrifield's actually having a bad year this year. Not that changes anything because he steals so many bases. He still shouldn't be cheap, but I didn't realize how bad he'd been hitting this year.
22 minutes to go, just in case you're not in the queue. 22 minutes to go as well until this show ends and the MLB Live Before Lock show begins. But that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking Oddsshopper, baby. If you are making any bets whatsoever, you should be using Oddsshopper to figure out what line you should grab. It's not going to help you at all to just blindly bet at one book. You're going to be leaving money on the table. Lots of books are going to have stale lines out there. You want to be able to compare them against others. Anything that you can get to in your particular state is going to be a benefit. We've got a state drop down for you. We're going to have expected ROI and expected win rates on some of our props. That should help you out a ton. You can just quickly sort by which one of these bets is going to bring the biggest expected ROI for me. Click right to that book. You are done. You can set up alerts if lines move for you, but really having that display in front of you where you can see multiple lines at multiple books at the same time allows you to shop around and get the best bet possible. Go to oddsshopper.com. That's 2 S's in the middle, something that I very rarely type correctly, but 2 S's in the middle. Use that tool and help yourself out. We got 4 games to go. Probably going to be able to get into a couple questions too at the end, but only if we hit that like button right now, run those likes up a little bit higher. Then maybe I can convince Adam to stick around and answer some questions, even more so than he's doing in chat right now, which kudos to Adam for participating in chat today. Angels and Astros, 4.3 run implied total for the Angels, 4.7 for the Stros. Patrick Sandoval, Zach Greinke. Sandoval at 7% ownership, Greinke at 1. I'm getting a little bit less Greinke now, by the way, so I don't have to go on that tangent. How do you feel about Sandoval, though?
I think he's got a really high ceiling. He's another guy that strikes out a lot of guys. He's just a good pitcher. He's cheap. He's a guy with a 27% strikeout percentage, and he's $7,300. On a lot of slates, that's just like a really, really good play. On this slate, it's kind of not. You still, if you have a popular lineup, you can roll the dice on someone like Sandoval and just hope that the strikeouts come through. But he's got a really difficult matchup against Houston. You have plenty of pitchers priced around him that give you similar strikeout upside, whether that's Luzardo or Alzolay or Malley. There's just guys there in better matchups that have similar strikeout numbers. So the layout of this slate makes me a lot less interested in Sandoval, that plus the matchup, than I typically would be if you told me that I got to roster Sandoval at 7,300.
All righty. Yeah, he came in at 1% for me. Greinke's coming in like the 8 to 9 range, so he's probably someone that I'm going to end up with 5 to 10% of. I won't freak out there. We don't need to dig into Zach Greinke any further than that. Do we need to dig into bats? Astros, honestly, a little bit under-owned as far as I'm concerned, but 4.7 run implied total, not all that great shakes. What do you want to do with Houston?
Yeah, kind of a middle of the road stack for me. They're projected to go a little bit under-owned, but I do also have a lot of respect for Patrick Sandoval. Not only does he have very good strikeout numbers this year, he's only allowed 0.84 home runs per 9, 3.61 xFIP is good. The Astros are always a team that you can roster at low ownership just because they have so much power upside, but Sandoval really just hasn't had weaknesses this year outside of slightly elevated walk rate. 116 expected ISO to righties, 25.5% K percentage against them. So you can't even really look to the splits as a reason to go there. So this is a spot where you're just betting on talent. We talk about it a lot with teams like the Yankees, teams like the Astros, the Dodgers. I think that in large field tournaments, kind of regardless of who they're facing, if over the course of an entire season, you just roster them every time that they're low owned, you probably come out ahead, but it's also just not a great spot for them.
I almost just had an absolute panic attack. Do you use CoinMarketCap?
Occasionally, not usually.
Okay. I clicked on my watch list because I just have some of the bigger coins there. And for some reason, it was showing the Ether price at like 2,100. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? And then I clicked into it and it was still at like 32 and change. But yeah, I was not really excited to think that I just lost 50% of the value of that.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been great.
But I wish I could give you the experience that I just had. I sunk in my chair. Not that I wouldn't expect it to go up, but it wasn't.
All that artwork I bought yesterday that I spent too much money on anyway just became really expensive if that happened.
That it did. Anybody other than Ohtani?
No.
I guess that's probably the easier way to ask that question moving forward when the Angels don't look all that great. Diamondbacks and Padres. 3.7 run implied total for the Diamondbacks, 4.8 for the Pods. Madison Bumgarner and Blake Snell. Bumgarner, no ownership. Blake Snell, a lot more than no ownership. 17% last time out. I think that number is too high for today. I'd like to hear your thoughts now that I do believe that's a little bit higher than what we had earlier.
Yeah, I think it's a little high. I still think it's a good spot for him. Arizona's not a good offense. Snell has thrown at least 100 pitches in back-to-back starts, which is good to see because that hadn't happened since like the beginning of June. Prior to that, he's got excellent strikeout numbers. 28.6% is the fourth highest on the slate, only trailing Robbie Ray, Josiah Gray, and Zach Wheeler. So all that's good. The problem with Snell is just he's so capable of imploding basically instantly because he has a 14% walk percentage. He's putting guys on base that drives up his pitch count. And then the other thing, with a walk percentage like that is typically it means you're working behind hitters a lot. And major league hitters are just really difficult to get out when they have the count in their favor. And then it also just lowers your margin of error because if you're just putting guys on base and then you get a little bit unlucky on, batted balls, you're in a lot of trouble. Whereas, if you're not putting guys on base, you're in a better situation. So still just a really risky pitcher. I think that he's a little bit underpriced. The thing that the reason I say I think he's a little bit overowned though is right now we have him getting more ownership than Charlie Morton. Charlie Morton probably has an even better matchup against the Nats than Snell has against the Diamondbacks. Charlie Morton is certainly a better complete pitcher than Blake Snell at this point. I don't really know why he's getting less ownership than Snell. So between those two, I think the answer is Morton. I don't think it's a drastic difference, but I do think Morton should be getting a little bit more ownership than Snell. You also, for example, he's getting more ownership than Tyler Mahle, who, there's red flags for Tyler Mahle, but it's not like Blake Snell's a safe thing either. And Mahle's $1,300 less. So yeah, like 16% ownership, 17% ownership isn't a ton, but at the same time, I think pitchers around him should be getting a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's really the issue. If you silo Blake Snell, I don't think it's crazy given the amount of guys that he can just simply ring up throughout this game. But when you bring in the context of all of the guys that are immediately around him that are, for all intents and purposes, the exact same salary, that's when it starts to become a little bit risky, because he is so prone for complete ejection. Like when it's bad for Blake Snell, it is aggressively bad. And not that it can't be like that for every other pitcher, but the complete meltdown for Charlie Morton is just going to look a lot different than it does for Blake Snell.
Agreed.
Padres bats against Bumgarner. I have them 5th overall, 8th in my leverage metric, which means that's probably a pretty highly ranked stack here. Do you go to San Diego? 4.8 run implied total seems not too shabby.
Yeah, I think they look pretty good.
Come on, man. Not worth knowing.
They're projected to go a little bit under-owned here. 4th highest top stack percentage. Again, it kind of just lumped into that group of teams that are in like the 6 to 8% range. Bumgarner is an okay pitcher, nowhere near as good as he used to be. Not quite as bad as I thought he would be by now, or as I would like him to be. But 20.8% strikeout percentage against righties for him, 186 expected ISO this season. You do have right-handed power in this lineup with Pham, Machado, Nola, Will Myers, and then the lefties. There's more lefties in the lineup for San Diego than I would really like going up against Bumgarner, but he has still had some issues with left-handed power this year, even though his strikeout percentage is higher. You do get a pretty weak bullpen behind him as well. So I think it's just a high upside spot for a team not getting much ownership.
Any interest in the Diamondbacks against that Snell ownership and obviously the aggressive volatility of Blake Snell?
Not really, just because the slate's so big. Snell is for sure the kind of guy that I love stacking against when he's popular, just because when he's bad, it is really, really bad. But 15-16% just isn't that much ownership for me to really want to go to a team as bad as Arizona. I think individually you can look to guys like Nick Ahmed or Kettle Marte, but Carson Kelly's fine too. But as far as a full stack on the main slate, it's a pretty tough sell. I do think on the night slate, that's a spot where it's pretty appealing, because I don't have our night slate ownership projections in front of us, but I'm sure Blake Snell's getting an absurd amount of ownership there. So if you want to go to Arizona, I'd do it there.
I'm pulling it up right now just to see if I can check it out, which we might not even have yet. Doesn't appear that we do. Yeah. By the way, Jared Neal, if you're around here all that often, how the hell do you not know who I am? I probably have more minutes on this channel than anybody else that works for the company at this point. Craziness, man. It's not like I'm not around. I promise you that I am. You clearly don't play NBA DFS. If you do, you were not around for Awesemo for the past 3 NBA seasons, or for the past
he just chooses his shows wisely. AKA he watches me and Lofty.
Yeah. That's also fair. Sorry, we don't have Jake and I doing strategy shows any longer. We could bring back the goods. That would be the way to do it. 2 more to go. Giants and Rockies, 4.5 run implied total for the Giants, 3.1 for the Rockies. Anthony Desclafani and Austin Gomber. Gomber at 3% ownership, Desclafani at 4%. Talk me out of going to more than 4% of Desclafani.
He's risky because he missed his last start due to shoulder fatigue. You never really know exactly how that's going to play out when a guy comes back, but he's in that like Nick Pivetta bucket for me, where I would like him on a lot of slates. On this slate, it's a little bit more difficult to get there because there's just so many good pitching options. But if you have a team that's just a little bit more popular in hitters than you would like, Desclafani certainly has the path to success here against one of the worst offenses in baseball.
I have to get there a little bit. Colorado stinks. 3.1 run implied total is the lowest mark on the slate. It's a major pitcher's park. I'm willing to take my chances here at 9K if he is just completely unowned. Should Robbie Ray be 29-4 in ownership? Probably not. Do I think Robbie Ray is obviously the better option here today? Yeah, unquestionably. But if he's just going to sit at 4% and the next closest guy is then Blake Snell at 8,400, I'm going to get to a little bit of Desclafani. I'd be more than okay going to like the 12%, 15% range. You get a couple multiples on the public. I don't think that that's a big time like reach in terms of that ownership. 9K is not ideal, but this lineup and this matchup looks fantastic. Any Gomber for you?
It's a pretty tough sell. He's definitely someone you can use in place of Luzardo. Again, just this slate is so pitching rich, basically. Like you can just kind of, there's like pitching for whatever your lineup build looks like. If you need a cheap pitcher and you don't want to go to Luzardo because you have ownership elsewhere, or you just want to pivot because it's Luzardo. Gomber is a good pitcher, and he is getting outside of cores, which is really nice. For the season, he has struck out 25% of hitters, 3.63 xFIP. He's a good pitcher, and he's cheap. He's cheaper than he should be talent-wise. That's just the case for so many pitchers on this slate. And then he does have a difficult matchup against one of the best offenses in baseball. So not a priority for me, but again, just one of these guys where he's still a good pitcher and still underpriced.
Speaking of best offenses in baseball, let me just refresh Top Stacks to see where they're at. Not high. So I have the Giants 6th overall. I have them as my number one leverage stack as well. Do you want to get to the Giants up against Gomber here? Only one lefty in the line and projected lineup in Brandon Crawford. This strikes me as a really nice spot to get a team that's not all that owned. Are you feeling the same way, or are you leaning more towards the Top Stack tool?
I'm leaning more towards the Top Stack tool. I have a lot of respect for Gomber. He's getting a really, really good park shift going into San Francisco. Even against righties this year, he has a 25% strikeout percentage, 282 expected WOBA, 137 expected ISO. He's got several secondary pitches. They get a lot of swings and misses from righties. So it's not surprising that he's had success against opposite-handed hitters. And then the other issue with San Francisco is because basically every hitter on their team is an above average hitter, them running out a right-handed heavy lineup, assuming they do so, isn't even that great for DFS, because all it means is that you're going to have Alex Dickerson and Mike Yastrzemski and Lamont and Wade or whatever lefties aren't in the lineup ready to pinch hit in high leverage spots later in the game and potentially take at-bats away from the guys that you rostered. So it's just still a really, really tough team for me to get to. I think probably the best argument for San Francisco's upside is that they can do damage against Colorado's bullpen, once Gomber is out. But I just really don't like the spot. I don't love getting to guys like Austin Slater when I think there's a good chance they're not going to finish the game. There's a lot of offenses I like more.
It just looks so cheap. Brian at 5,200, and then you can fit in anything you want. If you want to go 1 through 5, super easy. Can probably bring Wheeler and Ray along for the ride if you want. I have some interest in that construction, and I'm certainly going to be getting to the Giants. But again, they are my 6th overall stack. It's not a huge priority. I'm just a little surprised they're not pulling a bit more ownership. I guess that's what happens when you play in San Francisco. Final game, unless you have anything else here for Giants Rockies. I don't get the sense that you're interested in the Rockies, right?
I am definitely not interested in the Rockies.
Yeah, didn't think so. All right, we'll close this out. Maybe I'll have some time for a couple questions. So if you do have questions, drop them in Premium Slack or YouTube chat before we get out of here and turn this one over to the live before lock crew. Or are we supposed to get out of here at 5:55? Nope, 5. Good. Or 4:55, I meant. Anyway, Mariners and Blue Jays, 3.9 run implied total for the Mariners. 5 runs for the Blue Jays. Chris Flexen and Robbie Ray. We've waited this entire time to talk about the most owned pitcher on the slate. Talk to me about Robbie Ray against the Mariners.
Highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 30.2%, 3.46 xFIP. Walk percentage is much better this year than it's been in the past at only 6.8%. The only thing that Ray's really struggled with this year is home runs. He's allowed 1.59 home runs per 9. But you also have to keep in mind with him that he's, for a lot of the season, Toronto's home games were either in Dunedin or Buffalo, which were both extremely favorable parks for hitters. Even the Rogers Center, or whatever it's called now, I think it's still the Rogers Center, in Toronto is favorable for hitters. The American League East, everything's a hitter's park with the exception of Tropicana Field. So you expect Robbie Ray's home run numbers to be elevated more so than they would be if he pitched all of his games in Seattle, for example, where he's pitching tonight. And that's backed up by the ISO numbers he's allowed compared to expected ISO numbers. He's allowed a 200 ISO to righties this year, 173 expected ISO, 165 actual ISO to lefties, 149 expected. So I don't even think, he does still give up power, and he always has throughout his career, but I don't even think the home run concerns are quite as drastic as they seem if you look at his numbers at face value. So I really, really like him here. I think he's underpriced given his upside. He has, again, the highest strikeout percentage on the slate. You can certainly make the case that no pitcher, I don't even want to say should, but you can make the case that any pitcher that's pulling 30% ownership on this particular slate is someone you can be underweight on in large field tournaments just because there are so many alternatives. But I also think Robbie Ray's ownership is where it should be. Like if Ray were getting like 18% ownership, I would say this is like the dumbest thing I've ever seen and play a ton. So it's mostly a good spot for him. He just kind of needs to navigate his way around Haniger, Seager, France, and he should be fine. Park upgrade. I really like Robbie Ray. I don't really know how you wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's my number 2 on the entire slate. I do have Wheeler just a hair ahead of him, but 29% doesn't throw me off. He should be owned. He's good. I don't have anything else to add. Flexing, anything?
No, just not enough strikeout stuff for him. Brutal matchup against Toronto. A million pitchers on the slate that you can roster that have better stuff.
Blue Jays bats. I have them 9th overall. Probably properly owned-ish to slightly over-owned. I have no problem ever getting to most of these Blue Jays bats because the top of this lineup is loaded. But do they appeal to you in any way?
Yeah, I like the Jays here, just not getting a ton of ownership. If Bo Bichette's in the lineup, that makes it even better. He's missed the last game or two. But, just so much power here. And Flexen has done a good job of limiting power this year, just shy of 1 home run per 9 innings. He's only allowed he's allowed a 182 expected ISO to righties, 135 to lefties. But the thing that I just come back to is when a pitcher like Flexen that doesn't get many strikeouts is going up and going to let guys like George Springer and Vlad Guerrero and Marcus Semien and all these power bats put the ball in play, the upside's just so high for them to do damage. And if they get him out of the game, then obviously, you get some favorable matchups after that. So where the ownership's currently projected, I really like the Jays.
Yeah, I mean, I will certainly have some Springer, some Guerrero, some Semien. I don't know how much I'm going to have full 5-man stacks of the Jays, but I definitely want to have some pieces here. Do you have any pieces of Seattle?
I think Haniger's in a good spot, but there's also like 800 good outfield plays.
I'm with you. All right, let's sum it up now. Favorite stacks, favorite pitchers. Go ahead.
Kind of feels like cheating, but I'm going to go ahead and include Boston as a favorite stack now that the ownership has shifted a little bit. Milwaukee, if that weather cooperates, I really like. And I really like Toronto in tournaments as well. Favorite pitching, Robbie Ray, Charlie Morton. I still don't really know why Morton's not getting more ownership. I like Alzolay quite a bit as well.
Red Sox, again, just separating too much from the pack that I don't mind that their ownership is a little bit higher than where they are. Braves, Brewers, Padres, Giants. They're probably like the 5 teams that I'm going to concentrate most on. If I can take any shots on, I don't know, Astros, Tigers, A's, there's probably something to be found there. From a pitching perspective, clearly no issue going to Wheeler. No issue going to Robbie Ray. That ownership all looks fine to me. Desclafani would be the guy that I'm interested in if he's not pulling any ownership. And if I'm looking to pay down, I'll probably just stick to Luzardo. I understand that the ownership is a little high, but I do think he is unquestionably the best option you can pay down for. 457, not too shabby. I mean, we did hit the mark. It did take us on a little bit of a detour talking about a stack, but I think that's good stuff for everybody. We did get one question in Premium Slack, so I'll hit you with that before we get out of here. And I think you and I are going to have the exact same answer. What's a good general breakdown of stack sizes for FanDuel? I think this is also appropriate for DraftKings in 150 max. What's a good ratio of 4 4s or 4 3 1s, 4 2s?
I mean, you can answer FanDuel. I pretty much, on normal size slates at least, when I do play FanDuel, I typically am either going 4-4 or 4-3. DraftKings on the larger slates, I typically just really prefer 5-mans. So like when I create lineups, I create more 5-3s and 5-2s. And then some, I still will play the occasional 4-4 or 5X, but I really lean pretty heavily towards 5-3 and 5-2 on DraftKings.
Same sort of story. I don't have a preferred ratio of these things. I'm going to run 4 4s. I'm going to run 4 3s on FanDuel. I'm just going to smush them together, and whatever I take out of that 150 is going to be fine. Same story on DraftKings: 5 3s, 5 2s, 5 blanks, 4 4s. If that's a direction that I'm trying to go for, depending on the slate.
Yeah,
but I don't. Like you said, I don't about the aggregate makeup.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't really target a specific ratio other than I do make sure that, I just create more of the stack sizes that I like. But I also, when I'm choosing my lineups, it naturally, just because of some of the ways that I rank my lineups, like using team leverage and stuff like that, it's naturally going to bump up lineups that have hitters from the same team because, it's like if Toronto is a positively leveraged team, it's going to bump up the ones that have 5 Blue Jays as opposed to 4.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't get too bogged down on the exact splits between the two. Could you dig into something like that, whether 4-4s are better than 4-3-1s on FanDuel? Yeah, I'm sure. That difference to me is marginal at best.
I also think that you should probably like I think maximizing your stacks on FanDuel probably is a little bit more important than DraftKings just because of the scoring. DraftKings is more home run centric, whereas FanDuel you get runs and RBIs weighted a little bit more. So the correlation actually on FanDuel is a little bit stronger.
I would say pretty comfortably that in terms of 4-4s or 4-3-1s on FanDuel, there is no discernible difference for you. Sure. And finding that data and breaking it down is not going to be anything that's going to prove to be one is like better than the other. Yeah, but those are my two preferred constructions.
Right. Especially when you start factoring in slate size and how every slate's different in terms of construction and all that. My general point there was just like stacks are a little bit weaker on DraftKings just because you need home runs more so that like you're typically not winning a tournament because your team gets a bunch of RBI singles and doubles. Like you need those home runs. Whereas on FanDuel, you're just getting so many points for runs and RBI.
Time to go win a Brady. Adam and I are out of here. One more hour of MLB content before it gets turned over to NFL Live Before Lock. Good luck tonight, everybody. Keep your eyes peeled on the weather. That is the end of the work week for myself and Adam. So have some fun. You have more after today or tonight?
I work tomorrow.
It's not the work week. Monday to Friday is the work week, my man.
If you work Saturdays, it's Monday to Saturday.
Now, 24,000 in line ahead of me, so I'm not getting this Brady either. Good luck, everybody. We're out of here. The regular human work week, not our...
It is the Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock. Greg Ehrenberg here, joined with Terry McBride, T. McBee. Been a few days since we did a show together. You know, there was stuff like Tom Brady NFTs. I didn't even know that was going to be a thing the last time we talked to each other. But now it's consumed my life. That's all I do. I just sit on my phone, refresh, and look at the marketplace. So I know that you didn't have any luck with it today, but anybody in the chat, if you guys are into that or if you guys had any luck with that, post something about it, because I know towards the end of the show, that's something I'm going to be on my phone doing, is trying to get another one.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be in that next queue. I was just number 22,000 in our 5 o'clock version. Haven't had any luck. haven't dove into the marketplace for him yet, but it's cool to see DraftKings getting involved in it. Big, reliable, trustworthy kind of a source that everybody can go to. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, to your point, it's just amazing how these things like crop up like 2 days ago. Like who knew? 3 days ago. It's just unreal how these things pop up and become all consuming for like 3 days and then disappear again. So
yeah, I didn't like Tom Brady a week ago. Now he's my favorite athlete. So that's
exactly.
how the times change. But we have a baseball slate to talk about today, presented by Oddsshopper. If you guys are not familiar with Oddsshopper, maybe you're interested in sports betting, head on over to Oddsshopper.awesemo.com because you don't want to place a bet without first shopping and making sure that you find the best line available amongst all the legal books around you. So go check that out, Oddsshopper.com. Definitely something I use before I place any of my sports bets. But let's get into this slate because the number one thing that stands out to me, Terry, is there's a pretty big difference between FanDuel and DraftKings in terms of pitcher ownership. On DK, as per usual, we've got a lot of people spending up for pitching. Zach Wheeler, pretty popular. Robbie Ray. We've got some lower dollar guys that are popular also. We head on over to FanDuel, and the two most popular pitchers on the slate are Jesus Luzardo and Adbert Alzolay. That's picking up nearly 50% of the field's lineups right now in our projected ownership. Why do you think it is that the field is gravitating towards lower dollar pitchers on FanDuel, which is something we don't typically see?
I am kind of baffled by that one, to be honest. I actually checked in with the boss to make sure we were, we had our everything humming along and was accurate there and all systems go. So those are our projections. But yeah, that stood out to me as like everybody that I want to roster as a pitcher on the FanDuel slate is in single digit ownership, most of whom they're going significantly positively leveraged. So like, I love this pitching slate. I don't need to get to any 20 some odd percent owned Adbert Alzolay or Jesus Luzardo. I like both kids in a vacuum, but with that much weight on them in good matchups, sure, on different sides of the same game, I can just leave those guys out and get anybody that I want at good ownership marks. Sign me up. That's a great, great spot. I don't understand why the field's going to it other than just the $6,000 some odd dollar price tags. And both guys are in a good matchup facing the respective weak offenses on either side of that one. But it's not like we've got all these super expensive stacks that we have to pay for, super expensive bats to pay for on FanDuel. They've got their usual semi-broken hitter pricing up and it all looks pretty good. So I really don't understand what's creating that bubble around those two guys. So I'm very curious to see how this shakes out once we go live and where I end up on some of these pitchers, because it's the top of my board is wide open right now.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to be refreshing pitcher ownership as we go along because it's almost a thing where it just seems so off to me just based on the sniff test and the eye test where I don't understand why people are going this cheap. We have a big baseball slate. There's plenty of value to be had on FanDuel. So it's not like we need the salary savings. And it's not that I'm opposed to rostering lower dollar pitchers on FanDuel, but my lineups when I'm building them through Fantasy Crunch and just making my stacks and whatnot, it always tends to just lean towards rostering the more expensive pitchers because they're not that hard to fit into lineups. So for me on FanDuel, and it's going to be the same on DraftKings, but FanDuel especially, Zach Wheeler and Robbie Ray to me are the priorities I want to get to. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, those two are two of the top four on my board. I've got a top tight four, all projected within like 2 points of one another. The other two guys in that group are Charlie Morton and Julio Urias, who I think are both in also pretty good spots. Morton's a guy that I thought was going to be owned in the like mid-teens on this FanDuel slate, into the 20% range, going up against that awful Washington lineup for a fair price at $9,000, several thousand less than most of the other top-end starters. But yeah, absolutely, Wheeler and Ray are smash spot. I really like the spot for Robbie Ray, but I trust him less than I trust Wheeler. I trust Wheeler a lot more, but I like the spot a lot less, if that makes sense. So I can take either one of those guys, though. I'm happy to pay for them here. There are bats that combine pretty well with them, so I have no issues with either one of those. Wheeler led the league in innings pitched going into his last start and then pitched a complete game, 2-hit shutout, struck out, I think it was 11 guys. So, I mean, he's just been great on form all season. And Ray's been right there. Adam talked a little bit about the contact metrics, and that's really the prime concern about Robbie Ray is if he regresses in his walks. He's been amazing, best he's been in his entire career with walks this year. If he regresses in the walks, puts a few extra guys on base, the 9.4% barreled ball rate, the 44.2% hard hit rate, the 90.7 mile an hour average exit velo, 15.4 degree average launch angle, that could come back to bite him. And the Mariners are a team that does one thing well at the plate, and that's hit home runs against lefties. So there's a little bit of danger there, but there's plenty of strikeouts. They're second worst in the league for strikeouts against lefties at 26.2%, create runs 6% worse than average. So there's tons and tons of upside for Robbie Ray, particularly when he's going almost totally unowned. I love the spot for both of those guys.
Yeah, and on Robbie Ray, I have concerns with him going forward. This isn't the slate where I'm going to really express those concerns. Number one, he's not massively popular. FanDuel is projected for single-digit ownership. DK is projected for, fairly substantial ownership at 29%, but it's nothing that's so problematic that I want to stay away from him, especially considering the spot against the Mariners. The concerns I have with Robbie Ray are twofold. Number one, it's the hard contact that he's giving up a lot of it. I think he is a little homer prone, especially going forward. The other thing, too, is his walks were really in check earlier in the year, and his last 3 starts, 3 walks, 2 walks. A little concerning that's starting to rear its ugly head again. But once again, this spot against the Mariners, not really something that I'm going to concern myself with too much. And as comparing him to Zach Wheeler, the 2 pitchers I want to get to the most of today, I have a lean towards Robbie Ray right now just because he's the cheaper pitcher of the 2. He also projects a little bit better in our projections, but Ray versus Wheeler, do you have a lean in terms of which one you think you'll get more exposure to tonight?
I would guess probably Ray, just based on quality of opponent. I think with all those strikeouts there, he projects out a little bit better for me. So yeah, it's very, very close. I expect I'll have tons of them. I'm very curious to see where the final ownership numbers come in. But on the FanDuel slate, I mean, we've got Ray at 5% ownership. We've got Wheeler at, I think it was 7%. So I'm going to just get tons of those guys. It's not like they're going to get leveraged out. And I think the price on DK for Ray is spectacular at 9,200. Getting to Robbie Ray less than Julio Urias in this spot, that's a mistake price to me. So I don't think 29% ownership is probably about right. It might even be a little bit low for Robbie Ray in this spot at that price on DK. So I don't mind that. I think it's a pretty good spot to get to.
And then I have to ask you, because you said that Robbie Ray and Zach Wheeler, those are 2 of your 4 top pitchers on your board. I'm going to assume Charlie Morton is one of the other ones based on a comment you made. Is that correct?
It is.
And then the 4th one, is this for FanDuel, DK, or both?
This is FanDuel projection.
Is it Molly still?
No, Molly's actually, I like Molly here, and I kind of am in a spot where I'm a little bit in disagreement with my model. I think he scores a few more points, but he's middle of the road projected for me. That Philly lineup is okay. It's not great. It's a little bit under where they perform. They're a little overhyped, I think, when people talk about him, but I don't get him. The guy that I do get in that spot is Julio Urias in going up against the Mets. And it's actually a pretty weak version of this Mets lineup. They're throwing a bunch of right-handed hitters in there, but you get no Conforto in there today. You get who else is out of the lineup? There's a handful of hitters that are out of the lineup. So it's Nimmo, Alonso, Drury, J.D. Davis, Jonathan VR, McCann, Pilar, and Alberto Almora coming down the line. So some strikeouts on the back end there for Julio Urias to pick up that confirmed lineup, 25.8% strikeout rate on the average. So I think there's a lot of strikeouts there for him to pick up. And he's been pitching pretty well, 26.4% strikeout rate over 134.2 innings, 3.58 xFIP, only walking 5.1% of hitters. So I like the spot for him.
Yeah, and the other hitter that's out of the Mets lineup is Javi Baez. He is dealing with an injury. I forget exactly what the injury is, but he's day-to-day. He's out today. But yeah, so Julio Urias, I don't have an issue with him. The only thing is relative to the other options around him, I strongly prefer Robbie Ray and Zach Wheeler on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So relative to those top arms, how do you rate Julio Urias?
He would be 4th out of that group of 4. And then on a price play, I might move a guy like Molly up and expect that I would get more of a guy like Molly. And maybe some of these other guys like a Disclafani, some of the cheaper pay down options might just make their way ahead of him just based on price and the lineups that I would get where some hitter projections might carry the day and push them up. So he'd be 4 out of 4 on the top end of my board there. And then the next guy on that list, I don't really trust because I think the innings are extended in my model here, is Jack Flaherty just by projection. But I assume that it's projecting him out for an amount of innings that I don't really want. And I'm just not really going to be getting to him today. I don't love going to guys' first starts back. I know he's pitched, he made 2 starts in the minors, pitched 3 and change, and then pitched 4 innings. So yeah, I've got him projected for 5 and change. If I dial that back to 5, he plummets. And I think we're only going to see 5 innings from Flaherty here.
Yeah, and it's twofold, the issue with Flaherty. It's not just that he's coming off the injured list and that the innings that I think I would be really surprised if he works deeper than 5 innings. Yeah. It's, he's still a quality pitcher, but the upside is so capped. And when we have a slate of this size, it's really hard for me to imagine that somebody who he's priced a little cheaper than normal, but unless he's just totally flawless in those 5 innings, it's hard for me to imagine that he has the upside to be in the GPP winning lineup. So for me, I'm not going to have Flaherty in my player pool. It's a spot that I don't usually like to roster pitchers coming off the injury list. It's also been a while since he's made a major league start. His last one was May 31st. And even then, his last couple of big league starts, they were fairly conservative with his pitches, 91 pitches and 83 in his final 2 starts before going on the injured list. So, all that considered. And the other thing also with him going 3 and 4 innings in his last 2 minor league starts, we don't even know how efficient he was. Like, he might have been super efficient to get through 3 or 4 innings. So to me, Flaherty, not my player pool. I don't have an issue leaving him out. But let's hit on Charlie Morton, because Morton has pitched overall really solid this year. The other thing also with him, really good strikeout stuff. And this Nationals lineup is so awful now post trade deadline, where they got rid of so many guys. We're looking at Juan Soto and then generally a bunch of replacement level players. But Charlie Morton this year, 3.52 ERA, 3.49 expected ERA, strikeout stuff, 27.9% K rate. So above his career average, close to career high. Really strong year for Charlie Morton. And the other thing too is you don't have to pay as much for him as some of these other top pitchers. So Charlie Morton is 9K over on FanDuel. And then on DK, we have Charlie Morton at 8,300. So for me, I also prefer Charlie Morton to Julio Urias. Even if we weren't considering the difference in price, I think that I'd probably project Charlie Morton to be better, even if just nothing else was involved. So Charlie Morton, he is my third pitcher among the high end guys. So talk to me about Charlie Morton and how much exposure you're planning to get to him.
Yeah, same here. I would have him ranked out that way ahead of Urias here, just specifically based on the matchup. It's just such a weak Nationals lineup. I think Victor Robles has some skills in terms of his wheels, most particularly, but he's only stolen 8 bases this year, 314 on base, so he just doesn't get enough done for you at the top of the lineup. And then you get, like you said, it's Juan Soto and a bunch of replacement level players. I'll throw Josh Bell in there as a good hitter as well. Bell's pretty decent, although he's 243, 305, 462. He does have a 219 ISO, 19 home runs on the season, switch hitter. So those two are the real bumps in the road here, but Morton's been very strong all year long. And if you look at like the FanDuel top pitchers board, it stands out because he's technically slightly negatively leveraged based on, I think it's like a 5% probability of being the top option and like 7% ownership or something close to that. But when it's single digit ownership like that, I don't particularly sweat that slightly negative leverage, because it's just so low owned that you can get well over the field anyway and expose yourself to a wide range of outcomes with your hitters. And if you're capturing that upside of Morton's probability of success, you can kind of negate that small over-owned thing. So I really like the spot for Charlie here. 27.9% strikeout rate on the year. A few too many walks at 8.3%, but limits hard hits, limits barrels, 4.9% barrel ball rate, 33.8% hard hit. Very, very good. Keeps the ball down relatively, 8.4 degree average launch angle, induces swinging strikes 12.3% of the time. So really like the spot for Charlie Morton here. And I think he's mispriced, particularly DK, 8,300, 13.8% ownership as of my last update. Might have crept up a little higher, but that's too low, both in price and popularity on the DK slate. So I really like that spot.
Yeah, and we've got a couple questions in the YouTube chat. Somebody asked about the weather in the Atlanta-Washington game. It's something to keep an eye on. Right now, it's not something that's a massive concern for me. Using my trusty weather source, Google.com, it looks like we have about a 20% chance of rain at the top of the game. So not something that can happen, except it's a very low probability. So is that anything that you're weighing at all when you're considering Morton?
I'm just pulling up Dark Sky here, which is the site that Alex turned us on to at the beginning of the year. It looks like they've got a block of rain from 6 to 7, and then it's just cloudy and humid. So I think maybe it's a little bit favorable pitching conditions considering like some heat and humidity, but it's not even that hot. I'm not really worried about it. Doesn't look like much rain. Keep an eye on it, but we've got plenty of time before lock. But right now, I'm not sweating it.
Yeah, and the other thing too is I would be a little more concerned if we have this weather in the middle of the game. The fact that it's at the start of the game, a couple of things are going to happen here, most likely. Either it's not going to rain because it's not a super high probability, or the number two, it does rain, it's at the start of the game, and then they're just able to start the game up afterwards. We know that we've seen teams make wonky weather decisions, the Nationals in particular, but as of right now, it does not seem to be something that I'm too concerned about. We'll keep an eye on it closer to lock, and we'll have more information posted in our Slack chat. News got El Negro Loco. He's always on top of that stuff. But right now, it's not anything that would force me to fade Morton or lower my ownership with him at all. Here's somebody that I really want to ask you about because it's something that's really curious to me. Tyler Mahle, who wildly different play on FanDuel versus DraftKings. The main reason being he's 7,100 on DK. And I look at that and I just go, that's a misprice. As much as he's struggled post I'm trying to think how to describe the pitcher substance crackdown
stuff. Yeah,
yeah. It's as much as he's struggled since then. We've still seen the strikeout upside. He's only 7,100 on DK. The thing that's really tripping me up, why is he not picking up ownership right now? We only have him projected for 8.4% ownership, and that just seems off to me. It's not to say that I think he's going to be 30% owned or anything like that, but everybody I'm seeing is posting on Twitter about like, why is Tyler Mahle mispriced? And then I look at our ownership, it's like, well, he's not projected for any ownership either. So what do you make of 7,100 Tyler Mahle on DK right now?
Yeah, I love that spot. Even if that ownership crept up to, the 12 to 15% range, I still think it's a very strong spot just based on that price. I think maybe some of it in terms of why people aren't getting there is, like I said, people perceive the Philadelphia lineup to maybe be a little bit better than it is. Active roster, 10% worse than average, creating runs against right-handed pitching. 3.53% home run rate is like middle of the league. 162 ISO, middle of the league. 23.1% strikeout rate. They're okay. That's creeping up into the top third of the league in terms of this limiting strikeouts, but it's still a hefty enough rate. And Mahle's a very good strikeout pitcher, 28.4% on the season. We've seen him be higher than that. He's 8.6% walks are a little bit high, 1.22 whip, a few too many guys on base. So he can get himself into trouble, but you like to see the guys with the strong strikeout rate, the ability to induce swinging strikes. 12.1% for him is great. They can pitch their way out of jams. And he's also got a pretty good ability to limit hard hit, 34.3% hard hit, 7.5% barrel ball rate, maybe is a little bit higher than we'd like. 14-degree average launch angle can play into some of the power, but you get this lineup without Rhys Hoskins in it. That's a ding to the Phillies lineup here. It's just not a terrific lineup. I think there's plenty of upside on the board for Mahle. I like him at the $8,700 price on FanDuel, and I love him at the $7,100 and ownership on DK. That's a great, great spot.
Yeah, the FanDuel price point gives me a little bit more pause just because I think it's about fair. But still, I mean, there's enough strikeout upside here in him that the 7,100 price tag is too cheap. Last time out, if we're looking at an idea that maybe he's turned the corner, it was a start against Pittsburgh Pirates last time out, but 10 strikeouts to no walks in 7 innings his last time out. He struggled for so long. I just don't understand why the time that the DK pricing algorithm finally gives up on Tyler Mahle, it's after he has his best start in months. So, last time out against Pirates, 7 innings, 10 strikeouts, no walks, gives up 2 runs only. So, really strong outing for him last time out. Curious spot that we'd see his ownership dip by so much now. I think a lot of people might be looking at it as the other side being like, hey, unlikely to get the win bonus, maybe going up against Zach Wheeler. We know that the Phillies offense, like you said, has been, good as of late. But I think if I'm not misquoting, you said that you felt it was a little bit overvalued earlier when we started. And if you look at our pitcher projections right now, we do have Tyler Mahle with the 3rd best odds of being the top scoring pitcher on the slate right now. So for me right now, I think that he is the number 1 SP2 option on DK. For FanDuel, a little bit less of a priority. I know you said you have some interest in him there, but really what stands out to me, that 7,100 on DK, only 8% projected ownership. That is for sure a number that I want to be overweight to the field on. Now, let's talk about some of the. Oh, go ahead. Do you want to add something to that?
I just want to throw in on the strikeout front, because really something that he struggled with throughout June and July was it was more the walks than anything that really started to bite him. The strikeouts were largely still there, starting with his May 30th start, 8, 8, 6, 12, 8, 7, 7, 6, 8, 5, 2, 5, and then the 10 strikeout game that you had. So he's been putting up the strikeouts. It's just really the walks, and then those led to earned runs, and those cut his fantasy scores down. So the strikeouts have somewhat been there. Like you said, that was his best start in 2 months, the last one. But if we can expect a reasonable amount of strikeouts against this Philly offense, I think it's a killer spot. So sorry to cut off your transition there, but I just wanted to chime in on the Ks.
No, all good. And now we could talk about some of these lower dollar pitchers that I talked a little bit about at the top, just because they're so popular on FanDuel, and Adbert Alzolay and Jesus Luzardo. They are the 2 most popular projected pitchers on FanDuel right now. Now, DK has SP2 options. They're still popular, but relative to the ownership of the field, a little bit less so compared to what we're seeing on FanDuel. So we talked about them both being way too over-owned on FanDuel. But what do you make of them on DK? We have Alzolay project for 22% ownership at 7,600. Luzardo only 6,700 project for 25% ownership. So what do you make of them as SP2 options on DK?
Yeah, I think they're quality SP2 options over there, where it's just that I don't know how trustworthy they are. So given the pricing, like you can roster those guys, or you can get to a Mike Minor against St. Louis. I know we don't love throwing lefties at St. Louis, but I don't totally hate that spot for a little bit less than these guys cost on the DK slate. You can get to Molly for 400 more than Luzardo. You can get to him for 500 less than Alzolay over there. Patrick Sandoval, who we haven't talked about, going up against a very, very tough Houston lineup, but a very good pitcher with strikeout acumen. Austin Gomber going up against a strikeout-heavy San Francisco lineup at 6,800. DraftKings was really, really friendly with their pricing today. So if those guys are that popular, I'm happy to get away from it and just spread out some ownership. And they're in the 20s. So yeah, they are strong SP2 options there. But again, they're going to be going up against each other. There's a lot of people there. Two young pitchers who have pitched well by and large in spots. Alzolay more so, 105 innings, 24.4% strikeout rate, 3.89 xFIP, 116 whip. But he's giving up 40.1% hard hit, 11% barrel ball rate, 7.1% walk rate. That's a targetable pitcher, even with an offense that's bad like the Marlins. Jesus Luzardo, one of the most talented young pitchers in the game. If he can be on the mound, give you a sustained 200 inning season, I expect a ton from this kid in the future. But right now, 47 2/3, 21.5% strikeout rate, 10.5% walks, 4.87 xFIP, 10.1% barrel ball rate, 35.8% hard hit. He's targetable too. So I don't trust or love the spot for either one of these kids, despite the fact that they're both going up against bad teams. Even bad teams can get to young pitchers and get to guys, even good pitchers on the right day. So I don't love it.
Yeah, it's so much ownership going to these guys. And like you said, it's not like either one of them are lights out pitchers. There was a point in time where I did like getting to Luzardo just because, when he first came over to Miami, it's a team that's done well with young pitchers. And there were some slates where just didn't pick up that much ownership. Now I've gotten to a point where it's really popular. And somebody in the YouTube chat had said, let's see if I can find the comment and credit it to the person who asked the question.
Was it the person who said that Austin Gomber's better than Jesus Luzardo? Because that's
here. Okay, so Shannon Lambert said,
but Luzardo's more talented.
Shannon Lambert said, "Why Luzardo? He's been awful. I know it's the Cubs, but yeah, it's just because it's the Cubs. Everybody's seeing pitchers just shut down the Cubs recently because the Cubs they're offering no resistance at this point in time. Yeah. That's really what it is. People just see a cheap pitcher with a little bit of arm talent going up against the Cubs, and everybody's going to roster him. So I don't have an issue with Luzardo at his price point or anything like that. I just think it's too much ownership going towards him. So I think there are some good pivot plays. My number one favorite pivot play in this price range is Shane McClanahan. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, I think he's a better pitcher than Adbert Alzolay or Jesus Luzardo. The matchup against the Minnesota Twins is not the easiest. It's certainly not as easy as the matchup that Alzolay and Luzardo have, but the Twins are a team that swing and miss a lot. They generate a lot of strikeouts. And McClanahan, earlier in the year, there were some concerns about his pitch counts and how quickly he was coming out of games. But his last handful of starts, 91 pitches, 93, 89, 88, and 92. So we're probably not getting over 100 for him. But, if we're getting 90 plus from him, that's not all that much of a concern. So for me, the pivot that I like the most in this price range is going to be McClanahan. I like the strikeout upside. What do you think of him? And is there maybe another pitcher in this price range that you like for a pivot in tournaments?
Yeah, I would love McClanahan if he was a little bit cheaper on the FanDuel slate. I think 9,500 a little challenging to get to him with just the other options available over there. But for 7,800 on DK at 12% ownership, that's another guy where both the price and the popularity are incorrect. He should be more popular at that price. 28.1% strikeout rate over 84 innings. You mentioned the improving depth over the recent starts. 3.29 xFIP, 1.25 whip with an 8% walk rate. All right, maybe he puts a few too many guys on base. 8.9% barrel ball rate, 42.9% hard hit. There's a little concern there, but he's been good and he's been effective. And he is another guy. He can pitch his way out of jams. 15.7% swinging strike rate. I mentioned the strikeout rate. I think you did too. So we've hit it a few times, but yeah, I just like him. And this Twins lineup, 27% strikeout rate on the average. That's with Andrelton Simmons, 14.5% in the 9-hole. Josh Donaldson's 19.4 and Jorge Polanco 16.4. So you've got a number of guys in the mid 30s in terms of strikeouts in this Twins lineup. There's plenty of upside here for Shane McClanahan. I like that call a lot.
And then just follow up, is there anybody else in this price range? And really talking specifically here, DraftKings SP2 option, who you think makes for a good pivot off of Alzolay and Luzardo? Seems like you're on the same page as me. We're going to McClanahan here. He's really my guy. If we could pay up a little bit more than Charlie Morton, but I kind of consider him a different price range. So any of these other, like 6K-ish pitchers that are picking up less ownership than Luzardo and Alzolay that you're looking to get overweight to and potentially be pivot options?
I was going to throw Gomber into the mix, but I just pulled up San Francisco, and their strikeout numbers are dramatically better against lefty pitchers. So yeah, I'm gonna stay away from that call now. 21.6% strikeout rate for San Francisco. That's improved significantly throughout the last couple of months, and with the changes to that roster. So yeah, I don't love that spot for him now. 4.79% home run rate for San Francisco, leads the league against lefties. 187 ISO. Tough spot for Gomber. He is a talented kid. He's been pitching very well all season. That was the answer I was planning on giving you until I saw that strikeout rate improvement. No, not priced down enough. I mentioned Pat Sandoval, but I don't really like that spot. I think your McClanahan call is probably the right guy there if we're not going to one of these Alzolay, Luzardos. I mentioned Mike Minor before. He's at least worth mentioning and bringing up one more time, but there is just all that right-handed power in that Cardinals lineup. It's an entirely right-handed lineup with Tommy Edman as a switch hitter up at the top of it, and then 8 right-handed hitters following him. They pick up the DH today too, going into Kansas City. So I don't love it. Minor, 23.3% strikeout rate on the season, 4.28 xFIP, around league average. Too many barrel balls at 9.5%. Hard hit is manageable at 36.7%. It wouldn't shock me to see Minor put up like a serviceable SP2 score here, but is he going to run off and hide compared to some of these other guys against this Cardinals team? I don't think so. So I don't love that call. I think McClanahan's the much more likely guy to run off and hide with a score.
Yeah, and then the other thing also is not to forget, because we talked about him before, and you almost get lost that he's going under-owned right now, but right now we have Tyler Mahle at 7,100 projected for 8% ownership. So I keep refreshing that just to see if a different number pops up. But yeah, we have Mahle projected 8% ownership at 7,100 compared to Azalea 22% ownership at 7,600. Jesus Luzardo 25% ownership at 6,700. So if I'm looking to roster two cheaper SP2s for large field tournaments, I'd be looking to build around Shane McClanahan and Tyler Mahle for just a fraction of the ownership of those guys. Any other pitchers we've not mentioned you think we should talk about? FanDuel, DraftKings, really anybody we haven't hit on yet.
Is DeSclafani on the board for you? He's expensive at 9,000, but that Colorado lineup just is abysmal, and they've been bad all season. I know I actually didn't realize until Adam mentioned it on the last show, but he's got a shoulder thing going on and missed his last start because of that. Shoulders really, really concern me for pitchers. So that might just scratch him off my board given all the other options we've got. But kind of in a vacuum of everything else, I would like this spot for DeSclafani going up against this miserable Rockies lineup.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that bother me about DeSclafani. The matchup is certainly not one of them, but he is a little bit elevated in price. And then if you look at his last two starts, one of them I think maybe we could write off because it came against the Dodgers, but still he only went 2 2/3 in that start. 4 earned runs, 3 strikeouts, 2 walks. Then the follow-up was a pretty easy matchup against the Diamondbacks, a spot that I was pretty high on DeSclafani. He only went 4 1/3 innings, ended up giving up a pair of home runs, gave up 5 runs. So his last 2 starts haven't been very good. He also hasn't been able to work deep into those games. We've only seen him pitch a total of 7 innings across those 2 starts. And then you combine that with some of the shoulder concerns. If he was cheaper, I could get to him. And certainly I think that there's reason to think there's upside, but there's a lot of pitchers I like in that price range today. So he's just not making it for me. But I could see the reason for it, but ultimately somebody's not going to make my player pool.
Yeah, that's it. The shoulder thing is really probably what cinched it for me. It would have been a small allocation of shares for me anyway in crunches. Another guy that's kind of on my board, maybe just based on how he's projecting out, but I don't know that I need him, and he's not priced down where I think he should be. I think he's overpriced for who he is Cole Irvin, pitching for the A's, going up against the Texas Rangers here. I get a decent projection on him, but I just hate the 8,800 price on FanDuel and even 8,200 on DK. I don't think he's playable compared to most of those other guys in the 7s and the 6s that we talked about for SP2s. Is he on your radar at all?
Not really. One of the other things also, it's not even like these guys in a vacuum would be bad plays. It's a big slate with a lot of pitching options and a lot of guys that I think are underpriced or just undervalued. The main ones being on DK right now, like we talked about Tyler Mahle. That seems like a crazy price point and ownership right now. Shane McClanahan also. So you just kind of get to a point where when there's this many games, I have to draw the line somewhere else. It's like, hey, I'm rostering 800 players tonight in my player pool. So for that reason, just not somebody that makes it for me. The other guy who I think could draw interest from the field, Blake Snell. Obviously, I see a reason to think there's upside there, but I have kind of given up on Blake Snell at this point in the season. Snell is coming off a really strong outing, but given how much he's struggled this year, I kind of just look at it as a one-off. The control has been such a massive issue. Guess the last time Blake Snell less than 3 walks in an outing. Keep in mind also, he's not working very deep into games. When do you think is the last time? June 16th against the Rockies. So not a difficult matchup, but
no. Again,
he was only able to go with 3 1/3 innings, and he walked 2 hitters in that game. Since then, 3 walks, 4 walks, 4 walks, 3 walks, 4 walks, 3 walks, 3 walks. Control, a massive issue for Blake Snell. I get that he's going up against this Diamondbacks team. Last time out, 13 strikeouts, 3 walks, but I've soured on Blake Snell this point in the season. I hope he turns it around because he is somebody who I think is fun to watch overall. He's generating strikeouts, but I just don't think he's a good pitcher at this point in time.
Yeah, and the questions beyond that around just how they manage his innings, and I know he went to extended innings in his last start, but that's really the first time we've seen that through this season. So I just don't love it, and he's just too volatile, right? We're looking for some volatility, we're looking for some range of outcomes kind of guys that the public's not necessarily on. But yeah, 14.1% walks, 10.6% barrel ball rate, 40.2% hard hit. All that mixes together to just be not. This is not Blake Snell right now. This is not the pitcher that people remember with that name on him. So yeah, it's not a spot for me. He projects bottom third of my board. Just not really looking in that direction for him. Are you getting any Nick Pivetta? That's a fair price at 7,300 on FanDuel. But again, I don't know that I need it. And to kind of round off what you were saying just a minute ago, it's with Cole Irvin. It's just kind of, I'd rather just spend those shares on underowned Morton, Wheeler, Urias, and Ray shares if the field's not going to be there. Like I would hate to sacrifice some upside shares for those guys at positive leverage so that I can get to Cole Irvin, so that I can get to Nick Pivetta, Mike Minor, guys that I don't think are quite as good.
Yeah, so with Nick Pivetta, at least he's more strikeout upside than Cole Irvin. The main issue I have with Irvin is that, one, I think the price point is about fair, but that also is it's just hard to see a significant strikeout upside in him. For the year, Nick Pivetta has been a better strikeout pitcher. However, his length in games has dwindled over the last handful of starts, and his strikeouts have gone down. So we haven't seen Pivetta strike out more than 6 hitters since July 4th. And also his last handful of outings, 6 innings, 4 2/3, 4 2/3, 6 2/3. That's nice, but then 4 innings. So we just haven't seen the length or the strikeouts from him recently. So that's going to be the main thing that keeps me off of Pivetta. FanDuel obviously is a little more viable than DK just because the price point is lower. That, and also I think he's fairly likely to pick up the win bonus in this start. The quality start could be a little bit tricky though, just because we haven't seen him work 6+ innings very, very much recently. So once again, Nick Pivetta, not somebody who's going to be making into my player pool. I don't think he's an awful play, but I have to draw the line somewhere, and he's not somebody who's going to make the cut for me. So I think we've talked about all the relevant pitchers. If anybody has questions, throw them in. But to me, that kind of sums everything up.
Yeah, I think we covered certainly anybody that I would consider playing. But yeah, if anybody's considering any of the garbage at the bottom of the board, we're happy to talk about them. Throw it at us.
But until then, if nobody has questions, we will jump over to the stacks. And by the way, the MLB Top Stacks tool, my favorite tool on all of Awesemo.com, that is free to use today and something that I always like to look at when I'm building my lineups, try to see which stacks are overall overowned, underowned. We have the aggregate ownership percentage for each stack, and I'm refreshing the stack tool right now to make sure I have the most recent ownership as we're going over that. But in the meantime, guys, do us a favor. Like this video, also subscribe to our YouTube channel. After Terry and I are done with MLB Live Before Lock, there's going to be a preseason NFL Live Before Lock show. So stick around if you want to catch that information. Because, for preseason NFL, there's nothing more important than just getting information. That's really where the edge is. And those guys are going to have all of that covered in the show after this on NFL Live Before Lock. But let's hit some of these top stacks now. And I'm going to start by asking you this, Terry. What are you going to be doing with the Boston Red Sox today, who we have projected to have the best odds being a top stack today, but the ownership has gotten to be pretty aggressive right now. So on DraftKings, 18% ownership share for the Boston Red Sox. Over on FanDuel, 22.8%. They look like the best stack on paper, but what are you doing when the ownership is this high?
Yeah, they're going to be so spectacularly high owned. I'll try and get to some maybe interesting one-offs, but as far as a stack goes, unless I'm putting it together with something that's really, really underowned on the other side in terms of the stack and the low-owned pitcher, it's just hard to believe that I'm going to be stringing these guys together with unique enough lineups where I'm not just going to be competing against 50, if not the exact same lineups, very similarly built lineups where it's just going to eat up any of my leverage, any of my upside. So maybe if I'm getting to just looking at some of the FanDuel ownership, like I don't hate maybe a Jarren Duran for 2,500 if he's hitting second, 16-ish% ownership. JD Martinez, maybe if he stays below 20% at 4,000 is somewhat interesting, but that's pushing it for where I want to be on a slate this size as a guy as a one-off play. Maybe I could get to some, he's been bad this year, but Franchy Cordero for 2,100 and 5% ownership, but he's going to be probably in the back end of that lineup if he's even in it at all. So I just don't love it based on how much everybody's going to be there. Going up against Spencer Watkins, ridiculously targetable pitcher, is 16.2% strikeout rate over 32 innings, 9.8% barrel ball rate. The hard hit's actually pretty good, 30.4% hard hit, but he just doesn't sit anybody down. There's just every reason in the world to believe that these Red Sox are going to get to him, going to put some power on him as well. If you can figure out unique ways to do it, it looks easier to do a little bit on the DK slate where there's a little bit more room around some of those guys. Have at it, but I just can't see getting to too much of them. I'll be well under the field, I think.
Yeah, and something that I do like to do a good amount, and we do have Michael Roundtree brought this up in the YouTube chat, is stack the bottom of the lineup. And that is something that I really like to do with some of these higher owned offense. Not to say that I go out and I just go, hey, I'm going to roster 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hitters on DK. And because a lot of times that's also going to be suboptimal because then I'm just rostering bad hitters. The issue is even the bottom of the Red Sox lineup is projected to be pretty popular today. The only hitter on the entire lineup that we project for less than 10% ownership is Franchy Cordero right now, who we have expected to bat ninth and pick up 6% ownership. Other than him, every other player is expected to be popular. So it's not like there's some sort of, way that we could get away from the ownership, because even these other guys, Hernandez project for 20.5% ownership. Alex Verdugo, we have projected about 6th right now on DK and has a reasonable price point. He's projected for 19% ownership. Hunter Renfroe batting 7th at, a somewhat elevated 4K price tag, project for 13.6% ownership. And then over on FanDuel, kind of everybody is popular also. So while that is something I like to do, and I think that is a good shout out and something to look into, the real problem is just that those guys are already popular.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a favorite lineup build of mine, is just going to, start at 5 and build down and grab a couple of those hitters. I do that a lot. I'm also a big fan of grabbing a wraparound play from either the 8 or the 9 hitter. Somebody who gets on base, plays back up to the top, can help you offset ownership while still correlating with the top end of a lineup, depending on how ownership falls. It's just not set up that way for this Red Sox team. We'll probably talk about doing exactly that for some of these other stacks. This just isn't the spot for it, unfortunately, today, based on where they're at. I am a little bit kind of interested in the dormant power in Franchy Cordero's bat, though, at that low ownership. So who knows? Maybe we can see, maybe it comes down over the next hour on like a Kevin Plawecki, Franchy Cordero. Yeah, that's not even great, though. Like Alex Verdugo, I do think is a good hitter, but 278, 344, 428 with a 149 ISO, creating runs 8% better than average. It's not even the greatest version of a Red Sox 3-man if you were going to those 3 guys. So I don't love it for this team today.
Yeah, it's a team, and we have Dalton Henley in the YouTube chat said, would we stack Boston a single entry on FanDuel? For me, no. Like on paper, this is obviously a terrific spot for them. And if you ask me to bet my life on which team is going to be the highest scoring on the slate, I would say the Boston Red Sox. But as people who have watched my shows regularly this year, this is not a spot that I like to attack. We have the Red Sox on FanDuel, specific to Dalton's question. They're projected for a 22.8% ownership share and a 13.5% chance to be a top stack. That's massively negatively leveraged. We have them as the most over-owned stack on the slate on both FanDuel and DraftKings. The Red Sox are just a team that I would not really want to get to right now relative to what their ownership is. So low priority plays for me. I'd rather use them as one-offs in some lineups with lesser owned stacks, and that would be the way that I want to get exposure to Boston. But let's talk about some of these other teams now. We talked about the Red Sox and all their ownership, a spot that generally you and I aren't going to really love as much as the field, but which is a stack that really is standing out to you right now?
So let's see. Let me pull the board back up here. I just reloaded it a minute ago. Looks like the Braves are slipping into negative leverage territory, which kind of sucks. I was looking forward to that spot. I've got them in my placeholder. I'm getting just very nice power marks for the Braves here, going up against Josiah Gray. High-end premium kind of a rookie prospect, but still really just finding his way, and seems like he's going to play into some of the Braves' power upside. They loaded up at the deadline. I love what they did, bringing in Adam Duvall, bringing in Jorge Soler, Jock Peterson as well, Jock down at the bottom of this lineup today. So I think they're still interesting. I just uploaded the ownership, so this is actually kind of an interesting spot for that, right? I mentioned they crept into negative ownership, negative leverage territory, but this is a team where there are bats toward the bottom of the lineup that Dansby Swanson, Adam Duvall, Travis d'Arnaud, and Jock Peterson, that's a reasonably good 4-man stack. and all of those guys are owned in the single digits. Now, it's not so tragic with the other guys. Austin Riley, 10% hitting cleanup, you can certainly get to. Jorge Soler hitting second, 8.3%. These are FanDuel ownership numbers, by the way, 8.3%. So you can definitely roster the entire lineup up and down. But just as an example of, all right, maybe if I want to get away from a Freddie Freeman in the 20s, combining him with the obvious guys up at the top of the lineup, this is a team where I can immediately grab some of those guys from the bottom. Maybe you're not stacking them all together, but you're threading some of those guys with some of the guys from earlier in the lineup. So I just like the Braves here top to bottom. Excellent home run marks. They were the leading team in my power index today. And while the ownership has crept up a little bit, I think the prices are all very good, and they're easy to own. Nobody over 5,000 on the DK slate in that Braves offense.
And by the way, we did just get an ownership update in the top stacks tool. So thanks to it's J Poo B. I don't know if I pronounced all the letters the way that they're correctly in terms of order where it's supposed to go. But thanks for the shout out that it's updated. And the number one thing that's standing out to me in the update, the Red Sox, even more projected ownership. Now they're now up to 21.2% on DK, 24.2% on FanDuel. So that is a massive amount of ownership going to an individual team on a slate this size. So I have a feeling my night is going to be made or broken based on if the Red Sox go and score 1 million runs like they did the other day or not, because that's a team that, relative to current ownership numbers, is not going to be all that much interesting to me. Here's one team that is standing out to me more so on DK than on FanDuel, the Milwaukee Brewers, who another team that somebody brought up in the YouTube chat, or a few people bring up in the YouTube chat. I know some people have been saying they like them. Some people are saying they're concerned about the weather. The weather is a concern for me in this game, and that's something I'm going to have to keep an eye on closer to lock, because this does look like a game later on in the day where we have a 50 to 60% chance of rain. In the early going, it looks like there's a window to play the game, but we'll have to see if the storms end up getting there closer. But as of right now, and also I don't think the rain is keeping people away from the game, because if you look at the FanDuel ownership, the Brewers are still the second most popular team over on FanDuel. On DK, however, they only project for 5.4% ownership. The reason that they're less popular on DK than FanDuel is because they're a lot more expensive. So if you're looking at the price points on DK, 6,000 for Christian Yelich, 5,500 for Adames, 5,900 for Eduardo Escobar, 4,500 for Omar Narvaez. This is an expensive stack. I don't have a massive issue with it though, because the ownership is so low that I want to be overweight to the field. This is one of our most positively leveraged teams right now. FanDuel's a different story just because they are so popular, but are you willing to pay these price tags on DK, Terry?
I don't love it. It's a team that I've struggled to want to roster through the season. So for me, it's just a matter of I haven't been getting to these guys. I don't know that I want to get there when they're at some of their highest price points of the season. Eduardo Escobar, for all his quality, 258, 313, 493 on the season, 235 ISO is certainly very nice, 24 home runs. He's not a $5,900 hitter. I struggle to pay that price for him. I think the ownership is fair. What I love about it is the spot. Going up against Mitch Keller, incredibly targetable pitcher, both for power and for run creation upside, giving up a 50.3% hard hit rate over 57 in the third innings this season, striking out just 20.7% of hitters, 12% walk rate on the year, 1.81 whip is atrocious. So you can throw bats at Mitch Keller all day long. It's just based on the pricing, we've got plenty of pay down pitchers. So I guess you're doing like a double pay down maybe, or you're definitely paying down to one of the extremely cheap SP2s to get to these guys and then another quality stack. Or maybe we're sacrificing a little bit and going to a cheaper second stack. I don't hate it just based on the field not being there, but the prices for me are a little bit uncomfortable. 6,000 for Christian Yelich. I applaud DraftKings' steadfast refusal to lower his price, but 229, 372, 350 with a 121 ISO, 6 home runs over 296 plate appearances. Not the Christian Yelich we're used to seeing, and certainly not a $6,000 player right now. 46% hard hit rate, still very good. Willy Adames, 45.1% hard hit, 12.1% barrel ball rate ahead of him. There are guys I like in this lineup. There are guys who create runs in this lineup. I just struggle with the pricing.
Have you seen any of the information about Willy Adames and his eyesight and the issues that he had with the batter's eye in Tampa Bay?
No, I hadn't caught that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So obviously the Rays sold super low on Willy Adames. He was one of the top ranked prospects in baseball just, 2 or 3 years ago at this point. He was considered the top shortstop prospect in baseball, I believe, at that point in time. And even though his numbers overall were a little disappointing with Tampa Bay, he always hit really well on the road. He was a guy who in Tampa Bay, he had like a 79 WRC plus, but he had like a 133 WRC plus. I'm not exactly sure those are numbers, but around there. That's what the data was. And Willy Adames said that he really had struggles with the batter's eye in Tampa Bay, and it's something to do with his eyesight. And I think he might be colorblind or something like that. But so then they end up trading him, and now he's hitting the ball really well at Milwaukee. I kind of think that we could attribute any of the struggles he's had at all just to that batter's eye that they have over in Tampa Bay, which is notoriously difficult to see, just everything in the outfield there. But yeah, I'll send you some of the articles and stuff later. But Willy Adames I think he just legitimately might be one of the best hitting infielders in baseball. I think that's probably the main reason why. But that aside, I think this is a really good spot for Milwaukee. Over on DK, the ownership's down. As of now, the weather's something to keep an eye on, but as El Negro Loco posted in the YouTube chat, it's not something that's going to keep him away from the game. Not for me either. It's just something we'll look to see if those storms, maybe as we get closer to the slate, that ends up being somewhat of an issue. But let's talk about some contrarian stacks now, Terry. We've talked about the Red Sox. We've talked about the Brewers. Which teams are not picking up ownership on FanDuel and or DK that you think should be picking up more ownership?
I wrote about the Houston Astros today. It's a team, and Adam swiped the point earlier, so I'll make it again. It's just when good teams are under-owned and going up against at least reasonable spots, I think you come out a winner if you just go to them again and again and again, and you're just going to end up paying off over time. The Astros are one of the best offenses in baseball. They're one of the hardest teams to strike out in baseball. They put the ball in play like no other team in the game. They're going up against Patrick Sandoval here, who is a good pitcher, 26.7% strikeout rate on the season, over 82 and a third. He's walked too many hitters, 10% walk rate. So you cannot give extra passes to this Astros team. They'll punish you for that. So I really like the spot, and they're going single digits. It looks like it's gone down since I wrote the article, which is in the tournament strategy free on the site. You guys can click that and get my hitter by hitter breakdown for this whole lineup. Everybody except for Carlos Correa on the DK slate under 5%. He's at 5.1. Everybody on the FanDuel slate under 2%, and they're not priced up like crazy like the Astros have been a lot this season. Jose Altuve, the only hitter over 5,000 on the DK slate, only hitter over 4,000 on FanDuel. Everybody else, super fair prices, no ownership whatsoever. I think the field's making a mistake not getting these Astros hitters a little bit more.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the other thing, too, is that's a little weird about this. Like, we're seeing a lot of ownership going to cheaper pitchers, which should just enable people to be able to, pay up for some of these offenses a little more readily. But instead, everybody's just like, hey, I'm going to cheap pitchers to pay for the Red Sox. That's what it seems like the entire field is doing. There's a handful of teams, the Astros being one of them, that I love getting to whenever they're lower owned. The Yankees, the Red Sox, the Astros, the Blue Jays. These are teams that I've rostered pretty heavily this year. The Dodgers, another one, if I didn't mention them. Who, when these teams have 1-2% projected ownership, I just go overweight to the field. And long-term over the course of the season, I think those have been my most popular, my most profitable spots. The Blue Jays in particular, a team that has been really kind to me when they've been in those spots where, they're a little expensive and they're like 1-2% owned. There's been a whole bunch of slates where that team has gone off this year at lower ownership. I agree with you. I view the Astros as being in another one of those spots today. We have them right now projected for 0.8% ownership as a team on FanDuel, only 3% ownership right now on DK as a team. And once again, pricing is not a massive issue today. We don't have a whole lot of pitchers that we need to break the bank to pay up for. Even some of the guys we like Robbie Ray on DK is 9,200. On FanDuel, he's 10,700. So I don't see it massively problematic getting to some of these guys. And like you said, they're not as expensive as they should be anyway. So I really do like the Houston Astros call. I think that is a team to prioritize pretty highly. For me, over on DK, the Milwaukee Brewers, the Houston Astros, that's a team. Those are a couple of teams that I really like. Another team I think we need to talk about here is going to be the Tampa Bay Rays, because looking at them in the latest ownership projections, they've now become really popular. We have the Rays project for 11.3% ownership on DK. On FanDuel, project for 9% ownership. So we only have a few minutes left on the show, but don't forget, guys, we have the NFL preseason live before lock coming up after this. But what do you make of the Tampa Bay Rays and their increasing ownership?
Yeah, that gets a little bit concerning, particularly because it's on most of the hitters that I would want to get to, the Brandon Laus, the Wander Francos, Nelson Cruz, or Randy Arozarena of the world. The rest of that lineup is, there's some utility in some of these guys, but I don't love getting to the back end of this lineup either with like Yandy Diaz, Kevin Kiermaier, Manny Margot, Mike Zunino. I love the random chances at Mike Zunino, mammoth home runs that he always provides, but it's just not a comfortable stack on the back end there. And with all that heavy ownership, I don't really need to go here. I do like Wander Franco, maybe if you're trying to pull a one-off, under 10% ownership out of the top end of the lineup. So I shouldn't have thrown him into that over-owned group. I do kind of like that spot. Maybe some Randy Arozarena. I know it's a righty-righty, and you're not getting major upside in splits or anything here, but Michael Pineda, 20.5% strikeout rate on the season, not doing too much there. 44.1% hard hit rate, 9.1% barrel ball rate. Certainly some power upside here. It's just a question of where the ownership is. And I'm not going to try and like roster Brandon Lau or Nelson Cruz one-offs. I don't love the idea of getting to the popularity of the stack, but in a vacuum, I think it's a good spot for them. And that goes back to the question that Chad asked earlier in the show. And I think it's just kind of important to round that point off. It's a very, very different question. Which team is going to potentially score the most runs? Bet your life on which team is going to score the most runs tonight, and which team is the best play for GPPs. The best play for cash games is even a different question than that. But what's the best play and who's going to score the most runs tonight? Very different questions. So that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, once again, if it's who's going to score the most runs, it's the Red Sox, but they also have about double the ownership of their projected odds to be the top scoring team. So we've only got about 30 seconds left before we have to get out of here. So I'm just going to close with this. Guys, if you haven't done it, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Helps us a ton in terms of being able to get people onto the shows, keeps Terry and I employed, gives us people to talk to because we like to talk about baseball. So do us a favor, do that. Also, stick around. Coming up after us is going to be the NFL preseason live before lock. We got 15 seconds. So I'm going to go one thing really quick. Our player props tool, free over at Awesemo.com. Also use Oddsshopper, something to help you find the best odds of any of the legal sports books. Jesus Luzardo right now, under 6.5 strikeouts. That has an expected ROI of 32%. So that is the best bet right now in our player prop model. Under 6.5 strikeouts for Jesus Luzardo. And that is going to do it for Terry and I. NFL live before lock for the preseason coming up next. Good luck tonight, guys.
I like that call. I give him a 5.4.